The once the stagecoach doors swung open and Silas McCall's world shifted. The woman stepping down wasn't the bride from the letters. She was trembling, marked by a birthmark that ran like spilled wine across her cheek, and terrified. "There's been a mistake," she whispered. "I'm not the pretty one you ordered." In that dust-choked moment, he could have sent her back. Instead, he said 6 words that would change everything. "You're all I needed." This is their story, a love built on broken promises and second chances. Stay with me until the end and comment your city below so I can see how far this tale has traveled across the world. The Wyoming sky stretched endlessly above Pine Hollow, a canvas of pale blue interrupted only by the occasional hawk circling in lazy spirals. It was the kind of sky that made promises, of freedom, of possibility, of lives remade in a land where the past could be buried beneath prairie grass and forgotten. But promises, Lydia Rowan had learned, were often lies dressed in prettier words. She pressed her forehead against the stagecoach window, watching the landscape blur past in shades of gold and rust. The letter crinkled in her pocket, its edges worn soft from weeks of anxious handling. Not her letter. Never her letter. The words were meant for Catherine Hartley, the beautiful parlor maid with honey-colored hair and a laugh like church bells. Catherine who had been chosen. Catherine who had been wanted. Catherine who had run away 3 days before the coach was scheduled to depart. Lydia's fingers traced the birthmark that spread across her left cheek like spilled wine, a mark she'd carried since birth, a mark that had defined every moment of her 23 years. In Boston, it had made her invisible, except when it made her a spectacle. Children pointed, men looked away. Women whispered behind gloved hands about what sin her mother must have committed to birth such a marked child. The stage driver's voice cut through her thoughts. "Pine Hollow, miss. End of the line." Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was madness, criminal madness. She was wearing another woman's name like a stolen coat, traveling to marry a man who had chosen someone else entirely. When he saw her, when he realized, but what choice did she have? Mrs. Pemberton's boarding house had no room for charity cases. The textile factory had closed. Her sister's husband had made his intentions clear with wandering hands and whispered suggestions that made her skin crawl. Catherine's ticket had been paid for. Catherine's passage had been arranged. And Catherine had looked at Lydia with desperate eyes and said, "You could go instead. He doesn't know what I look like. You could have a new life. A new life built on a lie." The coach jolted to a stop, and Lydia's stomach lurched with it. Through the dust-hazed window, she could see the depot, a weathered building that looked like it had been standing since the territory was young, and beside it, a man, Silas McCall. She knew it was him before anyone spoke his name. He stood with the kind of stillness that came from years of watching horizons, his body lean and work-hardened beneath a canvas coat that had seen better seasons. His hat shadowed a face carved by wind and sun into something between handsome and harsh, all sharp planes and serious lines. He was perhaps 35, though the West had a way of adding years to a man's face while leaving his strength intact. He wasn't looking at the coach with excitement or anticipation. He was simply waiting, patient as the prairie itself, his gloved hands loose at his sides. The driver climbed down and began unstrapping her trunk. "Mr. McCall," he called. "Got your bride here? Safe and sound?" Lydia's hands shook as she gathered her skirts. This was the moment. This was where the lie would crumble, where she'd be sent back in shame, where... The door opened, and the afternoon light flooded in, harsh and unforgiving. She stepped down carefully, her boots finding purchase on the wooden step. The wind caught her bonnet, and she reached up instinctively to hold it, the movement exposing her marked cheek to the brutal clarity of western sunlight. Silas McCall's eyes found hers, and the world seemed to narrow to just that point of connection. His gaze moved across her face, not lingering on the birthmark, but not ignoring it either. Simply seeing, simply assessing. His expression remained neutral, unreadable as stone. The words tumbled out before she could stop them, driven by panic and something like honesty. "There's been a mistake," her voice cracked. I'm not the pretty one you ordered." The silence that followed felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. The driver paused in his work. A woman sweeping the porch of the general store stopped mid-stroke. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Silas studied her for a long moment, and Lydia watched something shift behind his eyes. Not disappointment exactly, but a kind of quiet recognition, as if he were seeing something he'd expected all along. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and steady, carrying the weight of Wyoming granite. "You're all I needed." 6 words. Simple. Absolute. They hit her chest like stones dropped into still water, sending ripples through certainties she hadn't known she was holding. She faltered, thrown completely off balance. "You don't understand. I'm not Catherine. I'm not the woman from the letters. You're here," he interrupted gently. "You came all this way. That tells me enough." He turned to the driver. "Tom, help me with her trunk." "Now hold on," Lydia said, her voice rising. "You can't just—" "I lied to you. I took her place. I'm not who you think I am." Silas lifted her trunk with ease, muscles shifting beneath his coat. "You're a woman who needs a home, and I'm a man who needs a wife. Seems straightforward to me." He glanced at her over his shoulder, and for the first time she saw something almost like humor touch the corners of his mouth. "Unless you've got somewhere better to be?" The question hung in the air between them, and Lydia felt the truth of her situation settle over her like snow. No, she had nowhere better to be. No home, no prospects, no future beyond whatever she could build from this disaster. "I don't even know you," she whispered. "That makes us even," he replied. He set her trunk in the back of a wagon that looked as weathered and practical as everything else in this town. "Come on, it's a 2-hour ride to the ranch, and I'd like to get back before dark." Lydia stood frozen, her mind spinning. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. He was supposed to be angry, disgusted, unwilling. He was supposed to send her back. Instead, he was offering her a hand up into the wagon as casually as if they'd arranged this meeting over breakfast. "Why?" The question burst from her. "Why would you accept this? Accept me?" Silas paused, his hand still extended. His eyes, gray-blue like winter sky, met hers with unexpected directness. "You think you're the first person to come west wearing someone else's story? This territory's built on second chances and reinventions, Miss—" He hesitated. "What's your real name?" "Lydia," she said, the truth feeling both dangerous and necessary. "Lydia Rowan." "Lydia," he repeated, and somehow the name sounded different in his western drawl, less like the sharp Boston pronunciation and more like something soft and enduring. "I'm Silas, and I'm offering you an honest arrangement, a home, my name, and a chance to build something real. No lies from here forward. Can you accept that?" Could she? Lydia looked at his outstretched hand, work-calloused and steady. She looked at the wagon, at the distant mountains rising like promises on the horizon, at the town of Pine Hollow with its weathered buildings and wind-swept streets. Everything in her Boston life had taught her to be cautious, to expect disappointment, to prepare for rejection. But Silas McCall wasn't rejecting her. Against all logic and expectation, he was choosing her. She took his hand. His grip was firm, warm, even through her glove, and he helped her up into the wagon seat with surprising gentleness. As he climbed up beside her and took the reins, Lydia caught the curious stares of townspeople emerging from shops and doorways. A Chinese laundress, a banker in a too-fine suit, a group of ranch hands who looked at her with the frank assessment of men who'd been without female company for too long. "They'll talk," Silas said, following her gaze. "Small town. Nothing better to do." He clicked his tongue and the horses moved forward. "But talk's just noise. It doesn't change anything real." They rode in silence through Pine Hollow's main street, past the saloon with its painted facade, the mercantile with its false front and optimistic display of goods, the land office where men's dreams were recorded in ink and filed away. The town gave way to open country almost immediately, civilization ending abruptly where the prairie began. The landscape was overwhelming in its vastness. Lydia had never seen so much sky, so much emptiness, so much space between one human soul and another. In Boston, you were never truly alone. Walls pressed close, neighbors lived inches away, the city breathed down your neck with its smoke and noise and constant presence. Here, the world seemed to expand infinitely in all directions. making her feel simultaneously insignificant and strangely free. "It's beautiful," she said, surprising herself. Silas glanced at her, and something in his expression softened slightly. "It grows on you, the silence, the space. Some people can't stand it, drives them mad, all that emptiness. Others find it's exactly what they were looking for." "Which are you?" "The second kind." He adjusted the reins, guiding the horses around a cluster of rocks. "Came out here after the war. Couldn't stomach cities anymore. Too many people, too much noise, too many memories. The prairie doesn't judge, doesn't ask questions, just lets you be." The war. Lydia studied his profile, seeing the same shadows she'd seen in so many men's eyes back east. The veterans who came home changed, hollowed out by things they couldn't speak about. Her own father had been one of them, though he'd died before she was old enough to know him as anything but a ghost in her mother's tears. "You fought?" she asked softly. 4 years. Tennessee mostly. Some in Georgia." His jaw tightened. "Lost my brother at Shiloh. Lost most of myself somewhere between there and Appomattox. Found enough of the pieces out here to keep going." The honesty of it struck her silent. Men didn't usually speak like this, especially not to women they'd just met. But perhaps that was part of the Western bargain. The space demanded truth because there was nowhere to hide lies in all that openness. "I'm sorry," she said, "about your brother. Long time ago." But the grief in his voice suggested otherwise. Some losses never aged, never softened, never became anything but what they were. They rode on through the afternoon, the sun tracking slowly across the sky. Lydia watched the landscape shift and change, rolling grasslands giving way to rocky outcroppings, stands of cottonwoods marking invisible water sources, the distant mountains growing gradually closer. Hawks circled overhead, antelope scattered at their approach. Once a coyote watched them from a rise, then vanished like smoke. "Tell me about the letters," Silas said eventually. "The ones you read, the ones meant for Catherine." Lydia's face heated. "They were beautiful. You wrote about the ranch, about the land, about wanting to build something lasting, about needing a partner, not just a decoration." She twisted her hands in her lap. Catherine thought they were boring. She wanted adventure, excitement. She wanted someone different than me, Silas finished dryly. "Yes." "And you?" The question caught her off guard. "What about me? What did you want when you read those letters?" Lydia thought about Catherine's room at Mrs. Pemberton's, the two of them sitting on the narrow bed while Catherine complained about her dull cowboy, and Lydia read the letters with growing fascination. She remembered Silas's descriptions of dawn breaking over the prairie, of spring calves taking their first steps, of the satisfaction of fixing what was broken and building what was needed. She remembered thinking, "This man sees the world clearly. This man knows what matters." "I wanted exactly what you were offering," she admitted quietly. "A place to belong. Work that mattered. A life that meant something." Silas was quiet for a long moment. "Then maybe you were the right woman all along. Just took the wrong path to get here." The sun was lowering toward the mountains when buildings finally appeared on the horizon. A house, a barn, several outbuildings scattered across a gentle valley. The McCall Ranch wasn't grand or imposing, but it had a solid, enduring quality, like it had grown organically from the land itself. As they drew closer, Lydia could see details: the ranch house built of hewn logs and river stone, its porch deep and practical. The barn's wood had weathered to silver gray. Corrals held horses that lifted their heads to watch their approach. Smoke rose from a chimney, indicating someone had kept the fire going. "Mrs. Adler," Silas explained, seeing her look. "My cook and housekeeper, lives in the smaller cabin yonder. She's particular about her kitchen. Best to stay on her good side." They pulled up to the house, and Silas set the brake. Before he could climb down, the front door opened and a woman emerged, 50-something, built solid as a fence post, with steel gray hair pulled back severely and eyes that could probably identify a lie at 50 paces. Mrs. Adler's gaze swept over Lydia with the efficiency of someone assessing livestock. Lydia felt herself being inventoried, evaluated, and found wanting in the space of 3 seconds. "So," Mrs. Adler said, her voice flat, "this is the bride." "Lydia Rowan," Silas said, climbing down and offering Lydia his hand again. Lydia, this is Mrs. Adler. She keeps this place running. Mrs. Adler's eyes, fixed on Lydia's birthmark, lingered there just long enough to make the moment uncomfortable, then moved away. Dinner's in an hour. I suppose you'll want to freshen up. She turned and walked back inside without waiting for a response. Lydia stood in the yard feeling suddenly exhausted. The weight of the journey, the deception, the uncertainty, all of it crashed over her at once. Don't mind her, Silas said quietly. She's protective. Lost her husband and son to cholera 10 years back. Doesn't warm up to people easily. She hates me. She doesn't know you yet. He carried her trunk toward the house. Come on. I'll show you where you'll be staying. The interior of the ranch house was dim and masculine. Heavy furniture, practical arrangements, everything built for function rather than beauty. But it was clean, solid, and there was a certain austere comfort to it. Silas led her down a short hallway to a bedroom at the back of the house. This was my mother's room, he said, setting her trunk down. She passed 3 years ago. It's been empty since. He gestured around at the simple furnishings. A bed with a handmade quilt, a dresser with a cracked mirror, a rocking chair by the window. It's yours now. You can change whatever you like. Lydia walked to the window. The view looked out over the valley toward the mountains turning purple in the fading light. It's lovely, she said honestly. Silas stood in the doorway, suddenly awkward. We'll need to go into town tomorrow, make things official at the courthouse. Judge Whitmore handles marriages on Tuesdays. Official, Lydia repeated, the word tasting strange. If you're staying, we do it right, legal and proper. He met her eyes. But if you want to change your mind, if you want to take the next stage back east, I'll pay your fare. No hard feelings. It was an escape hatch, generously offered. Lydia looked around the room, at the mountains beyond, at this quiet man who had every right to be furious with her, and instead was offering patience and second chances. I'll stay, she said. If you'll have me. Something flickered across Silas's face. Relief, maybe, or satisfaction. Good. Wash up, then come to the dining room. Mrs. Adler's cooking is one of the few pleasures in this life I wouldn't want you to miss. He left, and Lydia sank onto the bed, her hands trembling. She'd done it. Crossed the country, stolen an identity, and somehow convinced a stranger to marry her. The fear should have been overwhelming, but instead she felt something unexpected. Hope. She unpacked quickly, hanging her few dresses in the wardrobe and arranging her meager possessions on the dresser. Catherine's letters she hid at the bottom of her trunk, evidence of the deception she'd have to carry forever. Then she washed her face and hands in the basin, changed into a fresh dress, and steeled herself to face dinner. The dining room was off the main living area, a simple space with a long wooden table that could have seated a dozen, but was set for only 3. Mrs. Adler was placing serving dishes down with firm, efficient movements. Silas sat at the head of the table, looking uncomfortable in his own home. Lydia took a seat, and Mrs. Adler served without ceremony, beef stew, fresh bread, butter, and strong coffee. The food was simple but excellent, each bite flavored with herbs and care. Thank you, Mrs. Adler, Lydia said. This is wonderful. Mrs. Adler sniffed. City girls usually turn their noses up at plain food, want fancy French sauces and such. I'm not most city girls. That's plain to see. Mrs. Adler's eyes flicked to her birthmark again, and Lydia felt heat rise in her cheeks. Mrs. Adler, Silas said, his voice carrying a warning. Just speaking truth, the older woman said. Girl's got eyes. She knows what she looks like. That's enough. The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. Lydia set down her fork, her appetite gone. May I be excused? Silas's jaw tightened. You haven't finished eating. I'm not hungry anymore. She stood, carefully folding her napkin. Thank you for the meal. She walked back to her room with as much dignity as she could muster, closed the door, and leaned against it. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She'd lived 23 years with people's cruelty. She could survive one more evening. A knock came at the door an hour later. Lydia? Silas's voice was quiet. Can I come in? She opened the door. He stood in the hallway, holding a plate covered with a cloth. Brought you some food, he said. Figured you might be hungry once your pride settled down. He held out the plate. Mrs. Adler made apple pie. It's good. Lydia took the plate, touched by the gesture. Thank you. I talked to her, Silas said, made it clear that kind of talk isn't acceptable in this house. She won't bother you again. You don't have to defend me. I do, actually. You're going to be my wife. He leaned against the door frame. This place isn't good at welcoming strangers. The land's hard, the work's harder, and people who survive out here tend to build walls high and thick. But don't let them make you feel like you don't belong. Lydia looked up at him, this tall stranger who kept surprising her with unexpected kindness. Why are you being so good to me? Silas was quiet for a moment, his eyes distant. Because I know what it's like to feel unwanted, he said finally. To carry marks that make people look away. He pushed up his left sleeve, revealing a scar that ran from elbow to wrist, old, thick, the kind that came from severe burns. Got this in the war. Field hospital caught fire. I pulled out 3 men before the ceiling came down on me. Lydia's breath caught. The scar was extensive, painful to look at. When I came home, the woman I'd been courting took one look at this and told me she couldn't marry someone damaged. His voice was matter-of-fact, but Lydia could hear the old hurt beneath it. Said she'd waited 4 years for a whole man, not pieces of one. She left that same day. That's terrible, Lydia whispered. It taught me something, though. He rolled his sleeve back down. Taught me that the marks we carry, the ones we're born with or the ones life gives us, they don't define our worth. People who can't see past scars aren't worth the trouble anyway. He straightened. You get some rest. Tomorrow's a big day. He was turning to leave when Lydia spoke. Silas? He looked back. Thank you for seeing past mine. Something warm flickered in his eyes. Didn't have to see past anything. Just had to see you. He nodded goodnight and disappeared down the hall. Lydia sat on the bed with the plate of pie, and this time when the tears came, they weren't entirely sad. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Lydia dressed in her best dress, a modest gray wool that Catherine had given her, saying it made her look like a governess, and tried to tame her dark hair into something respectable. In the mirror, her birthmark seemed darker than usual, standing out against her pale, nervous face. Silas was waiting by the wagon, cleaned up and wearing what appeared to be his only suit, well-made but years old, the shoulders slightly worn. He helped her up without comment, and they began the long ride back to Pine Hollow. The silence between them was different than yesterday's, less uncertain, more companionable. They were 2 people moving toward a shared fate, whatever that might be. Nervous? Silas asked as the town came into view. Terrified, Lydia admitted. Me too. She looked at him in surprise. You are? Getting married is serious business, even when you do it for practical reasons. He guided the horses down the main street. But I figure we'll manage. We're both sensible people. Sensible, Lydia repeated. Is that what we are? Well, one of us crossed the country pretending to be someone else, and the other is marrying her anyway. So maybe sensible isn't quite the right word. The corner of his mouth quirked up. But we'll make it work. The courthouse was a 2-story brick building that served as both legal center and judge's residence. Judge Whitmore was a portly man with impressive mutton chops and kind eyes that had seen too many desperate people making desperate decisions. McCall, he greeted Silas. This the bride? Lydia Rowan, Silas confirmed. We'd like to be married, Judge. Judge Whitmore looked at Lydia with the assessing gaze of someone who'd learned to read people. You sure about this, miss? No one's forcing you? I'm sure, Lydia said, and meant it. All right then, need 2 witnesses. Mrs. Whitmore, he bellowed. And someone fetch Tom from the depot. The ceremony was brief and businesslike. Lydia and Silas stood before the judge, their hands joined. The words were old and worn smooth by countless repetitions, to have and to hold, for better or worse, in sickness and health, until death parted them. When it came time for the ring, Silas pulled a simple gold band from his pocket. It was my mother's, he said quietly, sliding it onto Lydia's finger. It fit perfectly, warm and solid. By the power vested in me by the territory of Wyoming, Judge Whitmore intoned, I now pronounce you man and wife. You may kiss your bride, Mr. McCall." Silas looked at Lydia, a question in his eyes. She nodded slightly, and he leaned down and pressed a brief, careful kiss to her lips. It was chaste, respectful, nothing like the dramatic kisses in novels. But it was real, and it sealed the bargain they'd made. They signed the papers, Lydia's hand shaking slightly as she wrote her real name for the first time in weeks. Mrs. McCall, Lydia Rowan McCall. A new identity, earned through honesty this time rather than stolen. Walking out of the courthouse into the bright morning, Lydia felt the weight of what she'd done settle over her. She was married, bound to this man, this place, this life. There was no going back now. "We should stop by the mercantile," Silas said. "Get you some things. Fabric for dresses, whatever you need." They spent an hour in the store while Lydia selected carefully. Practical items. Nothing frivolous. Always conscious of the cost. Silas said nothing about money, just nodded approval at her choices and added a few items of his own. Good boots, a warm coat, a better sewing kit. "You'll need these," he said. "Winters are hard out here." At the counter, Mrs. Chen, the shopkeeper's wife, tallied up the purchases. Her eyes lingered on Lydia's face, but unlike Mrs. Adler, there was no judgment in them, only curiosity. "Welcome to Pine Hollow, Mrs. McCall," she said with a slight accent. "Mr. Silas is good man. You be happy here." "Thank you," Lydia said, touched by the kindness. As they loaded the supplies into the wagon, Lydia noticed a woman watching from across the street, young, beautiful, with golden hair elaborately styled. She was staring at Silas with an expression Lydia couldn't quite read. "Who's that?" Lydia asked. Silas's expression closed off. "Elizabeth Hartwick, the banker's daughter." He didn't elaborate, but Lydia understood. This was the woman who'd rejected him for his scars. Elizabeth crossed the street with the confidence of someone used to being admired. "Silas," she said, her voice like honey, "I heard you'd gotten married. I had to see for myself." "Elizabeth." Silas's tone was neutral. Elizabeth's eyes swept over Lydia with barely concealed contempt. "My," she said sweetly, "you certainly didn't waste any time finding a replacement, did you?" The words hung in the air like poison. Lydia felt her face heat, understanding the implication. A replacement for Elizabeth. Someone less desirable, easier to obtain. But Silas stepped closer to Lydia, his hand finding hers. "Lydia isn't a replacement for anyone," he said evenly. "She's exactly who I chose." He squeezed Lydia's hand. "We should get going. Long ride home." He helped Lydia into the wagon, and as they pulled away, Lydia glanced back to see Elizabeth standing in the street, her beautiful face twisted with something like fury. "I'm sorry about that," Silas said once they were clear of town. "Is she why you sent for a mail-order bride? Because you didn't want to marry anyone local?" "Partly." He was quiet for a moment. "After Elizabeth left, people looked at me different. Pitied me. Set their daughters on me like I was some kind of charity case. I didn't want pity. Didn't want someone marrying me because they felt sorry for the scarred war veteran." He glanced at her. "Thought a stranger might see me clearer, see what I could offer instead of what I'd lost." "And did I? See you clearer?" "You tell me." Lydia thought about Catherine's letters, about the thoughtful man who emerged from those carefully crafted sentences. She thought about Silas's patience yesterday, his kindness last night, his quiet strength this morning. "I see a good man," she said. "Someone worth knowing." They rode in comfortable silence until the ranch appeared on the horizon, and Lydia felt an unexpected swell of something that might have been homecoming. The house looked different in afternoon light, warmer, more welcoming. This was hers now. Her home. Her life. Over the next weeks, Lydia began to understand the rhythm of ranch life. The days started before dawn with the rooster's crow and ended when darkness made work impossible. There was always something needing attention, fences to mend, animals to tend, repairs to make. Silas worked constantly, his body in perpetual motion from sunrise to sunset. Lydia found her own tasks. She took over the garden that had grown wild, coaxing vegetables and herbs back to life. She mended clothes and linens, her careful stitches better than anything Silas had managed on his own. She learned to bake bread in Mrs. Adler's temperamental oven, though the older woman supervised with a critical eye that never quite softened. The ranch hands, 4 men who lived in the bunkhouse, treated her with cautious respect. They were weathered, mostly older men who'd found their way to the McCall ranch through various paths of desperation or escape. They called her ma'am and kept their distance, though she sometimes caught them watching her with curiosity. Silas remained unfailingly courteous, but distant. They inhabited the same house like respectful strangers, crossing paths at meals and in hallways, but never quite connecting. He left early, returned late, and when he was home, he seemed uncertain how to talk to her. Their conversations stayed carefully in safe territory: weather, cattle, supplies needed from town. At night, Lydia lay alone in her room, listening to the house settle around her, and wondered if this was all marriage would ever be. 2 people circling each other carefully, never quite touching. But small kindnesses appeared, evidence of attention being paid. Fresh coffee left by her door each morning, still warm. Her favorite chair moved closer to the lamp for better light. A wildflower in a jar on the kitchen table. No note, but she knew who'd picked it. One evening, nearly 3 weeks after the wedding, Lydia found Silas in the barn, working by lantern light. He was sewing something, his large hands surprisingly deft with needle and thread. "What are you fixing?" she asked from the doorway. He looked up, startled. "Your shawl. Saw it had a tear." He held it up, the gray wool wrap she wore most evenings. "Almost done." Lydia stepped closer, touched that he'd noticed, that he'd cared enough to fix it. "Thank you. You didn't have to." "Wanted to." He knotted the thread and bit it off. "This place isn't good at welcoming strangers," he said without looking up, echoing his words from their first night. "But don't let them make you feel like one." Something in his voice, the gentleness, the concern, made Lydia's throat tight. She sat on a hay bale nearby, watching him work. "Do you regret it?" she asked quietly. "Marrying me?" Silas looked up, genuine surprise in his eyes. "Why would I regret it?" "Because I'm not what you asked for. Because I lied. Because—" she gestured at her face. "Because of this." He set down the shawl and crossed to her, crouching so they were eye level. "Listen to me," he said, his voice firm but kind. "That birthmark doesn't make you less. Anyone who told you it did was wrong." His scarred hand reached out, hesitated, then gently touched her marked cheek. "We don't choose our marks, only how we carry them." Lydia's breath caught. It was the first time he'd touched her face, the first time anyone had touched it without flinching or pity. His calloused fingers were warm, achingly gentle. "You carry yours with dignity," he continued softly. "That's all that matters." In that moment, in the warm lamplight of the barn with hay scent and leather all around them, something shifted between them. Not love, not yet, but the first fragile root of it, pushing through frozen ground towards sun. The touch lingered between them for a heartbeat longer before Silas pulled his hand back, clearing his throat as if suddenly aware of the intimacy of the moment. He stood and retrieved her shawl, folding it carefully before placing it in her hands. "Getting late," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "Should head inside." Lydia nodded, clutching the mended shawl to her chest. As they walked back to the house together, the distance between them felt both smaller and more significant than it had been. Something had been acknowledged in that barn, something neither of them was quite ready to name. The following days brought a subtle shift to their interactions. Silas began staying closer to the house during his work, finding tasks that needed doing within sight of the kitchen windows. Lydia caught herself watching for him, listening for his footsteps on the porch, timing her bread making so it would come out of the oven warm when he returned for lunch. Mrs. Adler noticed, of course. The woman missed nothing. "Man circling you like a wolf circles prey," she commented one afternoon, kneading dough with practiced efficiency. "Though I suppose that's proper, seeing as you're his wife." Lydia felt her cheeks heat. "We're just getting to know each other." Mrs. Adler's tone suggested she saw more than Lydia was saying. "Known Silas since he was 25, fresh from the war, and full of ghosts. Never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." "And how does he look at me?" Mrs. Adler's hands paused in their work. "Like he's afraid you'll disappear if he blinks." She resumed kneading, her voice gruff. "That boy's had enough disappearing in his life. His brother, his father, his... She stopped abruptly. Elizabeth, Lydia finished quietly. That one. Mrs. Adler's mouth tightened into a hard line. Beautiful as a painted doll and twice as empty, led Silas around by the nose for 2 years, making promises she never meant to keep. When he came back scarred, she couldn't get away fast enough. She shaped the dough into a ball with more force than necessary. Some women can't see past the surface, too busy looking in mirrors to notice what's real. Is that why you were so cold to me? You thought I was like her? Mrs. Adler's hand stilled. For a long moment, she didn't speak. I thought you were running from something, she said finally. Could see it in your eyes that first day, fear and desperation. Figured you'd use Silas and leave when something better came along. She looked at Lydia directly for the first time in weeks. I was wrong. You've got staying power, and you look at him like he matters. The admission, coming from this stern woman, felt like a hard-won victory. He does matter, Lydia said. More than he knows. Then tell him. Mrs. Adler covered the dough with a cloth. Men are fools when it comes to understanding what's right in front of them. Have to spell it out in words of one syllable sometimes. That evening, Lydia found Silas on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of amber and rose. She brought 2 cups of coffee and sat beside him on the steps, their shoulders nearly touching. Beautiful night, she offered. Always is this time of year. He accepted the coffee with a nod of thanks. Before the snows come and lock everything down, how bad do the winters get? Bad enough. We'll be snowed in for weeks at a time. It'll be just us, you, me, Mrs. Adler, and the hands in the bunkhouse. No way in or out until the thaw. He glanced at her. Gets lonely. Cabin fever sets in. People go a little crazy cooped up together. Sounds terrible, Lydia said, but she was smiling slightly. Could be worse. Could be stuck with someone you can't stand. His eyes held hers. I figure we'll manage all right. The stars were beginning to emerge, pinpricks of light in the deepening blue. Lydia sipped her coffee, gathering courage. Silas, can I ask you something? Anything. Do you ever regret not waiting, not taking more time to find someone you could love? He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured, careful. I'm 36 years old, Lydia. Lost my youth to war, my 20s to grief, my early 30s to just surviving. I didn't have time to wait for some fairy tale romance. He turned to face her fully. But that doesn't mean I'm settling. It means I'm choosing what's real over what's pretty. And what's real? You are. This is. He gestured at the ranch, the mountains, the vast sky. 2 people building something together. Respect. Partnership. Maybe friendship, if we're lucky. He paused. Maybe more, given time. Lydia's heart beat faster. I'd like that. The friendship part. And maybe the more. Silas's expression softened in the fading light. Me too. They sat together until full darkness fell, and when they finally went inside, Silas's hand found the small of Lydia's back guiding her through the door. The touch was brief, almost unconscious, but it stayed with her long into the night. October gave way to November, and the weather turned sharp and cold. The ranch hands worked double time preparing for winter, reinforcing buildings, stockpiling feed, bringing cattle down from high pasture. Lydia helped where she could, learning tasks she'd never imagined doing in her Boston life. She learned to churn butter, to preserve vegetables, to render fat for soap and candles. Her hands, once soft and useless, developed calluses and competence. She also began to understand the isolation that would define their winter. Pine Hollow was a 2-hour ride in good weather, but once the snow started, it might as well have been on another continent. The nearest neighbor was 5 miles away. They were truly alone out here, dependent entirely on themselves and each other. The thought should have frightened her. Instead, she found a strange peace in it. One afternoon in mid-November, Lydia was hanging laundry when she heard horses approaching fast. She shaded her eyes against the sun and saw Silas riding in hard, his face grim. Behind him, 2 of the ranch hands drove a small herd of cattle toward the corrals. "What's wrong?" she called as Silas dismounted. "Fence down on the north section. Looks like someone cut it deliberately." His jaw was tight with anger. Lost about a dozen head before we found it. Rustlers? Maybe. Or someone sending a message. He handed his horse's reins to one of the hands. Get these animals penned and counted. I want to know exactly what we're missing. Mrs. Adler appeared from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. Trouble? The kind with 2 legs, Silas said darkly. He turned to Lydia. I need to ride into town, talk to the sheriff. Might be late getting back. I'll come with you, Lydia said immediately. No need. I'm coming. Her tone left no room for argument. If there's trouble affecting this ranch, I want to know about it. Something shifted in Silas's expression. Surprise, then approval. All right. Give me 5 minutes to change horses. The ride to Pine Hollow was tense and fast. Silas's silence was different than usual, coiled tight with barely suppressed anger. Lydia didn't press him with questions, sensing he needed space to think. The sheriff's office was a small building near the courthouse, occupied by a weathered man named Tom Bridger, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else when Silas walked in. McCall, Bridger greeted without enthusiasm. What brings you to town? Someone cut my fence and ran off a dozen head of cattle. I want it investigated. Bridger leaned back in his chair. Fence could have just broke. Wind's been fierce lately. Wire doesn't cut itself clean with shears, Tom. This was deliberate. You got proof? Witnesses? I've got cut fence and missing cattle. That's enough to warrant looking into. Bridger sighed heavily. Look, Silas, I'll ride out when I get a chance, but I got other problems right now. The Henderson place got hit last week, and I'm still looking into that. So my cattle don't matter because someone else got hit first? I'm saying I got limited resources and a lot of territory to cover. Bridger's eyes flicked to Lydia, then away. Besides, you sure this isn't just bad luck? You've had a run of it lately. The implication hung heavy in the air. Lydia felt it like a slap. The suggestion that marrying her had somehow cursed Silas's fortune. Silas's voice went dangerously quiet. What exactly are you suggesting, Tom? Nothing. Just saying. Bridger shifted uncomfortably. You've made some choices that raised eyebrows. Some folks think... I don't give a damn what folks think. Silas leaned forward, his hands flat on the desk. I'm reporting a crime. You gonna do your job or not? I'll look into it, Bridger said, but his tone suggested otherwise. That's all I can promise. Outside, Silas stood on the boardwalk, his fists clenched. Lydia touched his arm gently. He's not going to help, is he? No. The word came out clipped, angry. And I know why. Tell me. Silas looked at her, seemed to debate something, then said, The Henderson place he mentioned? That's Elizabeth's uncle. Tom's been courting her younger sister for 6 months. He's not going to prioritize my problems over theirs. So what do? We handle it ourselves. He started walking toward the mercantile. Need to buy more wire, and I'm putting up a watch rotation. Someone's going to guard that fence line until we figure out who's behind this. They were loading supplies into the wagon when a voice called out behind them. Well, the McCall newlyweds. Lydia turned to see a man approaching, tall, perhaps 40, with slicked back hair and eyes like chips of ice. He wore expensive clothes that looked out of place in Pine Hollow, and his smile didn't reach past his teeth. Silas went very still. Vane. McCall. The man's gaze slid to Lydia, assessing her with the cold calculation of someone pricing livestock. This the new wife? Heard you'd gotten married. Congratulations. What do you want, Marcus? Just being neighborly. Heard you had some trouble with your fence. Shame about those missing cattle. Marcus Vane's smile widened. These things do seem to happen when a man's distracted. New wife, new responsibilities. Easy to take your eye off what matters. I haven't taken my eye off anything. No? Vane's tone was all false concern. Then maybe you should pay closer attention to who's moving into the territory. Lots of new faces, some of them less friendly than others. He tipped his hat to Lydia. Ma'am, you take care now. This country can be dangerous for people who don't know how things work. He walked away, and Lydia felt a chill that had nothing to do with the November wind. Who was that? Marcus Vane, land speculator, buys up failing ranches and flips them for profit. Silas watched the man disappear into the saloon. He's been trying to buy me out for 2 years. I keep refusing. You think he's behind the cut fence? I think Marcus Vane doesn't do anything he can't profit from. He helped Lydia into the wagon. And I think we need to get home before dark. The ride back was quiet, both of them lost in thought. The sun was setting when they finally saw the ranch buildings ahead, smoke rising from the chimney and a welcome promise of warmth. But as they drew closer, Lydia noticed something wrong. "Silas," she said, pointing, "the barn door's open." Silas saw it too. His hand moved instinctively to the rifle under the wagon seat. "Stay here." "I'm not." "Stay here." His voice allowed no argument. He climbed down carefully, rifle ready, and approached the barn. Lydia held her breath, watching. The minutes stretched like hours. Then Silas emerged, his expression dark, and gestured for her to come. Inside the barn, the damage was systematic and deliberate. Tack had been cut, feed bags slashed open, tools scattered. But the worst was the message painted on the back wall in crude red letters: "Leave or worse comes." Mrs. Adler appeared in the doorway, her face pale. "They came about an hour after you left. 3 men, faces covered. The hands tried to stop them, but they had guns." Her voice shook slightly. "They said to tell you this is just the beginning." Silas stood very still, his jaw working. Then he turned and punched the barn wall hard enough to split his knuckles. "Silas!" Lydia rushed to him, grabbing his hand. Blood welled from the broken skin. "Stop it! This doesn't help." "They came to my home." His voice was rough with fury. "Threatened my people. Destroyed my property." He pulled away from her, pacing like a caged animal. "And I wasn't here to stop them." "You couldn't have known." "I should have known." The words exploded from him. "Vane as good as told me something was coming. I should have stayed. Should have—" He stopped, his hands fisting in his hair. "This is my fault." Lydia moved to stand directly in front of him, forcing him to meet her eyes. "No, this is the fault of whoever did it, not you." She took his bleeding hand gently but firmly. "Now come inside and let me clean this before you break it worse." For a moment she thought he'd refuse, but then the fight went out of him. He let her lead him to the house, let her sit him at the kitchen table while she fetched bandages and water. His knuckles were badly scraped, but not seriously damaged. As she cleaned the wounds, she spoke quietly. "Tell me about Marcus Vane. Everything." Silas watched her hands work, his voice weary. "He showed up 3 years ago with money from back east and an eye for struggling ranches. Buys them cheap, improves them just enough, sells them high. He's patient, methodical. If a place won't sell, he makes life difficult until the owner gives up." "How difficult?" "Accidents, fence breaks, cattle going missing. Nothing provable, nothing illegal enough to involve the law. Just enough pressure to make running a ranch impossible." His jaw tightened. "The Henderson place lasted 6 months before they sold. The Johnsons made it almost a year." "Why does he want your land?" "Water rights. My property controls access to Clearwater Creek, which feeds half the valley. Whoever owns my land controls irrigation for miles around." He looked at her. "It's worth killing for if you're that kind of man." "And you think Vane is that kind of man?" "I think Marcus Vane would burn this whole territory if it meant profit." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry, Lydia. I brought you into a war you didn't sign up for." She tied off the bandage and kept hold of his hand. "I signed up for better or worse. This counts as worse." She met his eyes steadily. "I'm not leaving. I'm not going anywhere." Something fierce and grateful flared in his expression. "You say that now, but—" "I say it, and I mean it." Her grip tightened. "I spent 23 years running from people's cruelty. I'm done running. This is my home now, our home, and I'll fight for it just as hard as you will." Silas turned his hand to lace his fingers through hers, the bandage rough against her palm. "You're sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." They sat like that for a long moment, hands clasped, a silent promise passing between them. Then Mrs. Adler cleared her throat from the doorway. "I made stew," she said gruffly. "You should eat. Going to need your strength for whatever comes next." The next morning, Silas gathered everyone, Lydia, Mrs. Adler, and the 4 ranch hands, in the main room. His face was set, determined. From now on, no one works alone. Always travel in pairs, and always armed. We set up a watch rotation, 2 men on the fence line at night, rotating every 4 hours. Anyone sees anything suspicious, you sound the alarm. He looked at each person in turn. This is going to get worse before it gets better. If any of you want to leave, I'll pay you through the end of the month and give you a reference. No hard feelings. The hands exchanged glances. Finally, old Pete stepped forward. Been working for you 6 years, Silas. Ain't leaving now just because some city snake is making trouble. Same here, said Jackson, a former cavalry soldier with graying temples. We stick. The other 2 nodded agreement. Silas's expression showed relief and gratitude. All right then, we do this together. Pete and Jackson take first watch tonight. Stay sharp. The men dispersed to their tasks, leaving Silas, Lydia, and Mrs. Adler. The older woman looked between them, then spoke. That vain man won't stop with property damage. He'll come for something more personal next. She looked directly at Lydia. You need to learn to shoot. Lydia blinked. What? You heard me. Out here, women need to protect themselves. Can't always count on men being around when trouble comes. Mrs. Adler crossed her arms. Silas can teach you. Lord knows he's good enough. Silas nodded slowly. She's right. You should know how to handle a gun. And so, that afternoon, Lydia found herself in the field behind the barn, holding a rifle that felt impossibly heavy and foreign in her hands. Silas stood behind her, his chest nearly against her back, his arms bracketing hers as he adjusted her grip. Stock goes here, against your shoulder, he murmured near her ear, and Lydia tried to focus on his instructions rather than the warmth of his body, the smell of leather and sage that clung to him. Sight down the barrel. See that post? She nodded, not trusting her voice. Breathe in, exhale halfway. At the bottom of the breath, squeeze, don't pull, the trigger. She followed his instructions. The rifle kicked hard against her shoulder, and the shot went wide, missing the post by 3 feet. Better than most first tries, Silas said. Again. They practiced for an hour, and slowly, painfully, Lydia began to understand the mechanics. Her shoulder would be bruised tomorrow, but by the end of the session, she'd managed to hit the post twice. Good, Silas said, taking the rifle. We'll practice every day until it's second nature. Walking back to the house, Lydia rubbed her sore shoulder. Do you really think it'll come to that? To needing to shoot someone? Silas was quiet for a long moment. I hope not, but hope's not a strategy. Better to know and not need than need and not know. That night, Lydia lay in bed listening to the wind howl around the house, thinking about guns and threats and the dangerous ground they were standing on. She thought about Marcus Vane's cold eyes, about the painted message in the barn, about Silas's bleeding knuckles. She thought about Elizabeth, beautiful and cruel, and about Mrs. Adler slowly warming to her presence. She thought about Catherine, safe somewhere far away, probably never thinking about the identity she'd abandoned. Most of all, she thought about Silas's hand in hers, the way he'd looked at her when she said she wouldn't leave, the way something had shifted between them in that barn weeks ago, and how it kept shifting day by day, drawing them closer. She was falling in love with him. The realization hit her with surprising clarity. Not the wild, passionate love of novels, but something steadier, built on respect and shared struggle, on quiet moments and small kindnesses. It was a love that grew like prairie grass, tough and enduring, with roots that went deep. The question was whether he felt the same. A sound from outside made her sit up, heart pounding. Footsteps on the porch. She reached for the small pistol Silas had left in her nightstand, another gift born of necessity, and crept to the window. But it was only Silas, checking the doors one final time before bed. She watched him test each lock, his shoulders tense even in the moonlight. He carried the weight of protection like a physical burden, and she wished she could somehow share that load, make it lighter. As if sensing her watching, he looked up toward her window. She drew back instinctively, but not before their eyes met. He raised one hand in a small gesture, reassurance, or perhaps good night. She waved back, and he disappeared inside. The next few days passed in uneasy peace. The watch rotation continued, but no more attacks came. Silas pushed everyone hard, preparing for winter while staying vigilant for threats. Lydia found herself falling into a rhythm, shooting practice in the mornings, household work during the day, evening meals where the tension gradually eased as exhaustion took over. Mrs. Adler began teaching her to cook properly, gruff instructions given with occasional nods of approval. "You're not hopeless," the older woman said one afternoon, watching Lydia knead bread. "Got decent hands for dough work." Coming from Mrs. Adler, it was high praise. On a Tuesday, exactly 2 weeks after the barn incident, Lydia was in the garden harvesting the last of the squash when she heard a rider approaching. She straightened, hand moving instinctively toward the pistol at her belt. Another new habit, but relaxed when she recognized the horse. Silas dismounted quickly, his face strange. "We need to talk." Her stomach tightened. "What's wrong?" "Inside." He glanced around, suddenly cautious. "Not out here." In the kitchen, he pulled a folded paper from his pocket and handed it to her. "Found this nailed to the fence post on the north section." Lydia unfolded it with trembling hands. The message was brief and terrifying. "The marked woman brought you bad luck. Send her away or watch everything burn. You have 1 week." The paper fluttered from her fingers. "No," she whispered. "No, this can't." "It's Vane's doing," Silas said, his voice hard. "Trying to divide us. Make me think you're the cause of all this." "Maybe I am." The words came out broken. "Maybe if I left." "Don't." He gripped her shoulders, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Don't give him that power. Don't let him make you believe his lies." "But the note is meant to scare us, to make me choose between my ranch and my wife." His hands gentled on her shoulders. "There's no choice, Lydia. I already chose you." Tears burned in her eyes. "You might lose everything because of me." "Then we lose it together." He pulled her against his chest, his arms wrapping around her tightly. "You hear me? Together. I'm not sending you away. I'm not letting him win." Lydia buried her face in his shirt, breathing in his scent, feeling his heart beat steady and strong beneath her cheek. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Me too." His voice rumbled through his chest. "But we'll face it together." They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other in the quiet kitchen while the afternoon light slanted through the windows. When Lydia finally pulled back, Silas's hand came up to cup her marked cheek, his thumb brushing away tears. "This mark," he said softly, "it's just part of you, like my scars are part of me. It doesn't make you cursed or unlucky. It just makes you Lydia." She covered his hand with hers, pressing it more firmly against her face. "How did I get so lucky to find you?" "Pretty sure I'm the lucky one." His smile was small but genuine. "Though I admit the circumstances could have been better." Despite everything, she laughed, a small, watery sound. "We do have terrible timing. We'll work on that." He kissed her forehead gently, and the gesture was so tender, so full of unspoken feeling, that Lydia's breath caught. "Come on, we need to show this note to the others. Everyone needs to stay extra alert." The meeting was tense. Pete's face darkened when he read the note. "Threatening a woman," he spat. "Man who'd do that ain't worth the powder to blow him to hell." "We don't know for certain it's Vane," Jackson pointed out, though his tone suggested he had his suspicions. "Who else would it be?" Mrs. Adler demanded. "Man's been circling this place like a buzzard for years. Now he's got another weapon to use against us." She looked at Lydia. "Girl's an easy target because of her mark. Superstitious fools will believe anything." "Then we make sure nothing happens to give those fools ammunition," Silas said firmly. "Double the watches. No one goes into town alone, not even for supplies. We act like everything's normal, but stay ready for anything." That night, sleep eluded Lydia entirely. She lay in her bed, watching shadows shift across the ceiling, jumping at every creak and groan of the settling house. Around midnight, she gave up and wrapped herself in her shawl, the one Silas had mended, and padded quietly to the kitchen. Silas was already there, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee and his rifle within easy reach. He looked up when she entered, his expression softening. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked. She shook her head and poured herself coffee, then sat across from him. "Keep thinking about that note, about what it means." "It means Vane's getting desperate. That's actually good news. means we're not breaking as easily as he expected, or it means he's about to escalate to something worse. Silas couldn't argue with that logic. They sat in silence for a while, the lamp flickering between them, casting their faces in warm relief against the dark kitchen. "Tell me about your family," Silas said suddenly. "Your life before. You never talk about it." Lydia wrapped her hands around the warm cup. "Not much to tell. My mother died when I was 16. Never knew my father. He died in the war before I was born. I had an older sister, married, who let me live with them after mother passed." She stared into her coffee. Her husband wasn't kind. When Catherine got her notice about coming west, it seemed like a door opening, a way out. You were brave to take it. I was desperate. She looked up at him. Bravery implies choice. I didn't have any. You had a choice to give up, to stay and endure. Instead, you crossed the country alone on a lie and a prayer. His eyes held hers. That's not desperation. That's courage. The words settled into her chest, warm and healing. Thank you for seeing it that way. I see you, Lydia. All of you. He reached across the table, his hand open in invitation. She placed hers in it, and his fingers closed around hers, warm and solid. Whatever comes next, we face it together. That's not just words. That's a promise. She believed him. Looking into his weathered face, seeing the determination and unexpected gentleness there, she believed every word. The weak vein had given them past in heightened tension, but no further incidents. Every morning, Silas checked the fence lines. Every evening, he made sure all the animals were accounted for. They existed in a state of constant vigilance, waiting for the other shoe to drop. It finally fell on the 7th night. Lydia woke to shouting and the acrid smell of smoke. She bolted upright, her heart slamming against her ribs as orange light flickered through her window. Fire. The corral was on fire. Lydia scrambled out of bed, pulling on her boots and grabbing the pistol from her nightstand. The hallway was already filled with smoke, and she could hear Silas's voice bellowing orders outside. She ran through the house, yanking open the front door to chaos. The wooden corral fence was ablaze, flames climbing 30 feet into the night sky and casting everything in hellish orange light. The horses inside were screaming, rearing, and crashing against the rails in their panic. Silas and the ranch hands were already there, some fighting the fire with buckets from the well, others working frantically to free the terrified animals. "Lydia!" Mrs. Adler grabbed her arm, appearing from the darkness. "Help me with the pump! We need more water!" They worked together, filling bucket after bucket, while the men formed a chain, passing water hand to hand toward the flames. The heat was tremendous, searing even from 20 feet away. Lydia's lungs burned with smoke, her eyes streaming tears, but she kept pumping, kept filling buckets, kept moving. Silas had gotten the gate open and was inside the corral, trying to drive the horses out to safety. But the animals were too panicked, running in circles, refusing to go through the opening. Lydia watched in horror as a burning rail cracked and fell, missing Silas by inches. "Get out of there!" she screamed, but her voice was lost in the roar of flames and the horses' terrified cries. Then she saw him, a figure on horseback at the edge of the firelight, watching, just watching. Even through the smoke and chaos, she recognized the shape of him. Marcus Vane sat his horse calmly, observing the destruction he'd wrought like a man admiring his handiwork. Their eyes met across the burning corral, and he touched his hat in a mocking salute before wheeling his horse and disappearing into the darkness. "Silas!" Lydia pointed, but he was gone. She turned to Pete. "It was Vane! I saw him!" "Go tell the sheriff!" Pete shouted over the noise. "We got this!" But there was no time. Even as he spoke, a section of fence collapsed inward, and one of the horses, a beautiful paint mare, reared and came down wrong, her leg buckling. She went down screaming, and Silas was suddenly there, dodging hooves and flames, trying to calm the injured animal. Jackson finally managed to drive the other horses through the gate to safety, but the mare couldn't move. Silas knelt beside her, his hands gentle on her neck even as flames crept closer. Lydia saw the moment he made the decision, saw the grief cross his face as he pulled his pistol. She turned away, but she couldn't block out the sound of the single shot that ended the mare's suffering. It took another hour to bring the fire under control. By the time the last embers were doused, dawn was breaking gray and cold over the ranch. The corral was destroyed, reduced to charred posts and ash. The barn had scorch marks but had been saved. The horses huddled in a temporary enclosure Pete had hastily erected, their coats dark with sweat and their eyes still rolling white with fear. Silas stood alone near the burned corral, his face black with soot, his shoulders bowed with exhaustion and grief. Lydia approached slowly, her own hands blistered from the pump handle, her dress ruined with smoke and ash. "Silas," she said softly. He didn't turn. "Daisy was my mother's horse. Raised her from a foal." His voice was rough, scraped raw. "She was 16 years old. Should have had another 10 years easy." Lydia moved to stand beside him, their shoulders touching. "I'm so sorry." "This is my fault." The words came out flat, dead. "I should have posted guards closer to the buildings. Should have anticipated this. Should have—" "Stop." She grabbed his arm, forcing him to face her. "This is not your fault. This is the fault of the man who set the fire. Marcus Vane did this. Not you." "I saw him," Silas said, and his eyes were terrible in the dawn light. "When I was in the corral, I saw him watching from the ridge, just sitting there, smoking a cigar while my mother's horse burned." The rage in his voice frightened her, not because she feared him, but because she recognized how close he was to doing something that couldn't be undone. "Then we go to the sheriff. We tell him what we saw. Tom Bridger won't do anything." Silas pulled away from her. "He's in Elizabeth's family pocket, and they're in Vane's. We file a complaint, and it disappears. Meanwhile, Vane comes back and burns something else. The barn next time. Maybe the house." He looked at her, his face stark. "Maybe he stops going after property and starts going after people." The implication sent ice through her veins. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying maybe it's time to fight fire with fire." He started walking toward the house. "We've been playing defense. Maybe it's time to go on offense." Mrs. Adler was in the kitchen, already preparing food for the exhausted men. She took one look at Silas's face and said, "Don't do anything stupid, boy." "Define stupid," Silas said, pouring himself coffee with hands that shook slightly from exhaustion and fury. "Riding into town with a gun and making accusations you can't prove." Mrs. Adler set a plate of bread and bacon in front of him. "Getting yourself arrested or killed, leaving your wife a widow before you've even properly made her your wife." The blunt words hung in the air. Silas slumped into a chair, suddenly looking every one of his 36 years and more. "Then what do you suggest? We just wait for him to burn us out completely?" "I suggest we think smart instead of angry," Mrs. Adler poured coffee for everyone. "Vane's got money and connections, but he's not invincible. Men like him make enemies. We just need to find the right ones." Pete and Jackson came in then, both gray with smoke and exhaustion. Jackson accepted coffee gratefully and said, "Found something you should see." He laid out several items on the table, a flask with initials engraved on it, a glove of fine leather, and most damning, a matchbox from the Excelsior Hotel in Cheyenne. "Found these near where the fire started. Someone was careless." Silas picked up the flask, studying the initials. "MV, that fool actually dropped evidence." "Or wants us to find it," Lydia said slowly. "What if this is another trap? You go into town accusing him with this evidence, and suddenly he's got witnesses saying he was nowhere near here tonight. You look like a fool or a liar, and he looks like a victim." Everyone stared at her. Silas set down the flask carefully. "Go on. Think about it. He's been so careful up until now. Cut fences with no witnesses. The barn vandalism while we were conveniently in town. Nothing we could prove." She gestured at the evidence. "Why get sloppy now? Unless he wants to draw you out, make you do something reckless." Mrs. Adler nodded slowly. "Girl's got a point. Vane's a snake, but he's not a stupid one." Silas rubbed his face, leaving streaks in the soot. "So what do we do?" "We keep the evidence," Lydia said, "but we don't confront him, not yet. First we find out everything we can about Marcus Vane, where his money comes from, who he's crossed, what secrets he's hiding." She looked at each of them in turn. "Everyone has secrets. We just need to find his." Jackson leaned back, a slow smile crossing his weathered face. "I might know someone who could help with that. Old army buddy who works for a land surveyor in Cheyenne. Sees a lot of business deals, hears a lot of talk." "Contact him," Silas said. "Carefully. I don't want Vane knowing we're digging." They spent the rest of the morning cleaning up, tending to the horses, and assessing the damage. The corral would need to be completely rebuilt. Several saddles and bridles had been destroyed. The cost would set them back months, maybe longer. But they were alive, and the house and barn were intact. It could have been so much worse. That afternoon, Lydia found Silas behind the barn, using a shovel to dig a grave for the mare. He'd wrapped her in canvas, a gesture of respect for an animal that had served his family faithfully. She picked up a second shovel without asking and began to help. They worked in silence, the physical labor a kind of meditation. When the grave was deep enough, they gently lowered the mare into it and began filling it back in. With each shovelful of earth, Lydia felt Silas's grief settling, hardening into something colder and more determined. When it was done, Silas stood over the mound for a long moment. My mother used to say that everything happens for a reason, that God has a plan. He shook his head slowly. I stopped believing that somewhere in Tennessee, watching boys younger than me die in the mud for nothing. But she never lost her faith, even when my father died, even when my brother fell. He looked at Lydia. What do you believe? Lydia thought about her own life, about the birthmark that had shaped every moment of her existence, about the desperate choice that had brought her here. I believe we make our own reasons, our own purpose. God might set the stage, but we choose what role to play. And what role are you choosing? She met his eyes steadily. The one where I stand beside you, where I fight for what's mine, where I don't let men like Marcus Vane win. Something fierce and proud blazed in Silas's expression. He reached out and cupped her face with his dirt-stained hand, his thumb brushing across her birthmark in what had become an achingly familiar gesture. You're extraordinary, you know that? I'm practical, she corrected, but her voice was soft. You're both. He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away, but she didn't. His lips met hers, gentle at first, then deeper as she responded. The kiss tasted of smoke and grief and determination, of two people finding each other in the ruins and choosing to rebuild together. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. Silas rested his forehead against hers. I'm falling in love with you, he said quietly. Been trying not to, seemed too fast, too soon, but I can't help it. Lydia's eyes burned with sudden tears. I'm already there. Have been for weeks. He kissed her again, and this time there was nothing gentle about it. It was fierce and claiming, a physical promise that matched the words they'd just spoken. When they broke apart, both were flushed and unsteady. We should probably head back, Silas said, though he made no move to release her. Probably, Lydia agreed, but she was smiling. They walked back to the house hand in hand, and if the ranch hands noticed the change between them, they were too tactful to comment. But Mrs. Adler took one look at their faces and snorted. About time, was all she said, but her eyes were approving. 3 days later, Jackson returned from Cheyenne with information. They gathered in the house after dark, curtains drawn, speaking in low voices like conspirators. My friend pulled county records, Jackson reported, spreading papers on the table. Marcus Vane's been buying up property all over the territory for the past 5 years. But here's the interesting part. He doesn't keep them. Buys them, holds them for a few months, then sells them to a company called Consolidated Holdings out of Chicago. So he's a middleman, Silas said, studying the documents. More than that, I did some digging into Consolidated Holdings. It's owned by railroad interests. They're planning to extend the line through this valley in the next 2 years. The implications hit everyone simultaneously. Lydia spoke first. He's buying up land along the proposed route, getting it cheap from desperate owners, then selling it to the railroad at massive profit. And the key to the whole valley is, Pete trailed off, looking at Silas. Water rights, Silas finished grimly. My property controls access to Clearwater Creek. Any railroad coming through here needs reliable water for the steam engines, for the towns they'll build. He stood, pacing. That's why he's so determined. I'm not just another acquisition. I'm the linchpin to his entire operation. There's more, Jackson said. The railroad deal is contingent on securing water rights by January 1st. If they can't guarantee water access, they'll route the line through the northern pass instead. which means all that land Vane bought becomes worthless prairie. How long until January 1st? Lydia asked, though she dreaded the answer. 6 weeks. The silence was heavy. 6 weeks. That was how long Marcus Vane had to break them, to force Silas to sell, or to find another way to get what he needed. 6 weeks until the pressure would become unbearable. So we just need to hold out for 6 weeks, Mrs. Adler said. Then his deadline passes, the railroad goes north, and Vane loses everything he's invested. 6 weeks is a long time, Pete said quietly. Lot can happen. Lot can go wrong. Silas looked at each of them, his loyal hands, his stalwart housekeeper, his brave wife. I won't blame any of you for leaving. This is going to get worse. Vane's got 6 weeks and everything to lose. Desperate men do desperate things. Already told you, Pete said. We're staying. Same, Jackson agreed. The other two hands nodded. Mrs. Adler just snorted. Boy, I survived cholera, poverty, and 30 years of Wyoming winters. I'm not about to let some snake in a fancy suit run me off. Lydia said nothing, just took Silas's hand and squeezed it. Her presence was answer enough. Silas's voice was rough when he spoke. Then we fortify. Turn this place into something that can withstand a siege if necessary. And we spread the word about what Vane's really after. Maybe if enough people know the truth, he'll lose his leverage. Over the next week, they worked frantically to prepare. The corral was rebuilt, stronger than before, with metal hardware that wouldn't burn. They stockpiled food and ammunition. Silas rode to neighboring ranches, carefully spreading information about Vane's railroad scheme. Some believed him. Others thought he was just bitter about the competition. But seeds of doubt were planted. Marcus Vane, for his part, seemed to disappear. No more threats arrived. No more attacks came. The silence was somehow worse than the action had been, like waiting for thunder after seeing lightning. Lydia spent every spare moment practicing with the rifle and pistol. Her aim improved steadily, and with it, her confidence. Silas taught her to shoot from different positions, to reload quickly, to stay calm under pressure. She hoped she'd never need these skills, but she was grimly grateful to have them. The evenings, though, belonged to them. After dinner, Silas would find excuses to stay near the house, and Lydia would sit with him on the porch or by the fire. They talked about everything and nothing, their pasts, their hopes, the life they were building together. Sometimes they just sat in comfortable silence, Silas whittling while Lydia mended, content in each other's presence. One night, nearly 2 weeks after the fire, Silas took her hand and led her outside. The November sky was brilliant with stars, the air crisp and cold enough to see their breath. Look, he said, pointing up. That's Orion, the hunter. Those 3 stars are his belt. Lydia studied the constellation. My mother used to show me the stars. She said they were promises, God's way of saying there's always light in the darkness. Do you still believe that? She leaned against his chest, his arms coming around her automatically. I believe we make our own light, like this, you and me, here together. That's light enough to hold back a lot of darkness. He kissed the top of her head. When all this is over, when Vane's gone and we're safe, I want to do this right. Court you proper, take you to dances in town, show you off like you deserve. I don't need dances or showing off, she said softly. I just need this. You, me, and our life together. You'll have it. I promise. His arms tightened around her. Whatever it takes, you'll have the life you deserve. They stood like that for a long time, wrapped in each other in starlight, pretending for just a moment that the world was only this, only them, only peace. The illusion shattered 4 days later when a rider came galloping up to the ranch, his horse lathered and wild-eyed. Lydia recognized him as one of the Henderson ranch hands. McCall! The man shouted, barely staying in the saddle. You need to come quick! There's been trouble! Silas ran from the barn, Lydia close behind. What kind of trouble? Vane's men hit the Henderson place last night, burned the main house. Mr. Henderson's hurt bad. Smoke got his lungs. Mrs. Henderson sent me to fetch you. Says she needs to talk. They rode hard to the Henderson ranch, arriving to find the house a smoking ruin. Elizabeth's Aunt Martha stood in the yard, her face streaked with soot and tears, while neighbors worked to salvage what they could. Silas, Martha said when she saw them. Her voice was raw. Thank God. I didn't know who else. We can't fight him anymore. He's won. Where's John? Silas asked, dismounting. Inside the foreman's cottage. Doctor's with him now. She looked at Lydia, really looked at her, and for the first time there was no judgment in her eyes, only shared understanding of fear and loss. He came in the night with 6 men, told John to sign over the deed or watch his family burn. John refused, so she gestured at the destroyed house. They said it anyway. John went in to save some things and breathed too much smoke. Doctor says he might not make it. Silas's face went white. Did you see Vane? Can you testify? They wore masks. Martha's voice broke. But I know it was him. I know. And it doesn't matter because Sheriff Bridger won't do anything. He came this morning, looked around, said it was probably an accident. A lamp knocked over. She laughed bitterly. An accident that started in 3 different places at once. We're fighting him too, Lydia said quietly. We know about the railroad. We know what he's really after. Martha looked at her with sudden, desperate hope. Then you know he won't stop. Not until he has what he needs. She grabbed Silas's arm. Listen to me. Vane came to see me this morning, made me an offer. He'll pay our medical bills, give us enough money to start over somewhere else, if we sign over our water rights. Said if we don't sign by Friday, John's accident might get more permanent. That's extortion, Silas said, his voice hard with rage. That's reality out here. Martha looked between them. I'm telling you this because he's going to come for you next, and he won't be subtle anymore. He's running out of time, and desperate men don't play by rules. They stayed long enough to help where they could, then rode back in heavy silence. The sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of blood and fire. Lydia watched the landscape pass and felt the noose tightening around them. He's going to force our hand, she said finally. One way or another. I know. Silas's jaw was set. Question is, do we wait for him to come to us, or do we take the fight to him first? What could we do? We don't have the manpower or the resources to... We have information, Silas interrupted. We have proof of what he's planning. Maybe it's time to go over Bridger's head, straight to the territorial governor. Would he listen? He might, if we present it right. The governor doesn't like railroad companies trying to strong-arm landowners. Bad for his image. Silas looked at her. It's a risk. I'd have to go to Cheyenne, which means leaving you here for several days. Then I'll come with you. No, too dangerous on the road. If Vane knows we're both gone, he could hit the ranch while it's vulnerable. He reached over and took her hand. I need you here, keeping things running, keeping everyone safe. Can you do that? The thought of being separated terrified her, but she understood the necessity. When would you leave? Tomorrow morning, first light. The sooner I go, the sooner I'm back. That night, they sat together long after everyone else had gone to bed, neither wanting to acknowledge that morning was coming. Finally, Silas stood and held out his hand. Walk with me. They went outside, where frost was already forming on the grass. The air was so cold it hurt to breathe, and their footsteps crunched loud in the silence. Silas led her to the rebuilt corral, where the horses dozed peacefully. I need to tell you something, he said quietly. In case anything happens, nothing's going to happen, Lydia interrupted fiercely. Listen. He turned to face her, his hands gripping her shoulders. If something does happen, if I don't come back, the ranch is yours. Everything. I made sure of it with Judge Whitmore last week. You're my wife, my heir. This place is as much yours as it is mine. Silas, don't... Let me finish. His voice was gentle but firm. You're the strongest person I've ever met. Stronger than you know. If the worst happens, I need you to promise me you'll keep fighting, keep this place running, don't let Vane win. Tears froze on Lydia's cheeks. I can't do this without you. Yes, you can. You crossed a continent alone. You faced down prejudice and threats and a burning corral without flinching. You can do anything. He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her tightly. But I'm planning on coming back. Planning on spending the next 50 years with you, building this ranch, raising a family if we're blessed with one, growing old together. He kissed her, deep and desperate. That's the plan. The only plan. They made love that night for the first time, in the room that had been his mother's and was now theirs, with starlight streaming through the window and the whole uncertain future stretching before them. It was tender and fierce and sealing, a physical manifestation of the promises they'd been making with words and actions for months. Afterward, they lay tangled together, neither wanting to sleep and waste what time they had left. "I love you," Lydia whispered into the darkness, "more than I knew I could love anyone." "I love you too." His hand stroked her hair, gentle and repetitive. "And I'm coming back to you. That's a promise." Dawn came too soon. Silas dressed in his best clothes, strapped his rifle to his saddle, and kissed Lydia one more time before mounting up. Pete and Jackson would accompany him as far as the territory line, then turn back to help guard the ranch. "Be safe," Lydia said, her hand gripping his stirrup like she could hold him there through will alone. "You too. Listen to Mrs. Adler. Keep your gun close. Don't take any chances." He leaned down and cupped her face. "I'll be back in 4 days. 5 at most." She watched him ride away until he disappeared over the ridge, then stood there long after, staring at the empty horizon and praying to a God she wasn't sure she believed in anymore to bring him home safe. The next 3 days crawled by in agonizing slowness. Lydia threw herself into work, keeping busy to avoid thinking about all the things that could go wrong. She helped Mrs. Adler preserve the last vegetables from the garden. She practiced shooting until her shoulder ached. She checked the fences and counted the cattle and did everything possible to prove to herself that she could manage without Silas if necessary. But the nights were hard. She lay alone in their bed, breathing in the faint scent of him that still clung to the pillow, and counted the hours until his return. On the 4th day, a storm rolled in, early winter showing its teeth. Snow began to fall in the afternoon, thick and fast, accumulating rapidly. By evening, visibility was down to a few feet. The ranch hands huddled in the bunkhouse. Mrs. Adler made soup and worried aloud about Silas traveling in this weather. Lydia stood at the window, watching snow obliterate the world, and felt dread settling in her bones. Something was wrong. She couldn't explain it, but she knew, the way animals know earthquakes are coming before they hit. Just after midnight, she heard horses. Her first thought was relief. Silas was home early. But then she realized there were too many horses and they were moving too fast. She grabbed her pistol and ran to the window. Through the blowing snow, she could see riders circling the house, not coming to the door but surrounding it, trapping them inside. Fear shot through her. "Mrs. Adler," she called, "we have company." The older woman appeared from her room, already dressed and holding a rifle. "How many?" "At least 6 that I can see, maybe more." A voice called from outside, cultured and cold. "Mrs. McCall, I know you're in there. Come out where we can talk like civilized people." Marcus Vane. Lydia's hand tightened on her pistol. "What do you want?" "Just a conversation. About your husband's unfortunate situation. You see, there was an accident on the road to Cheyenne. A rock slide. Very tragic. He and his men are trapped, and I'm afraid the cold might do them in before rescue arrives." His voice dripped false sympathy. "Unless, of course, we can come to an arrangement." Lydia's blood turned to ice. "You're lying." "Am I?" Vane's voice carried an edge of amusement. "There's an easy way to find out. Sign over your water rights to me, and I'll have my men dig them out immediately. Refuse, and well, winter storms can be deadly. Bodies might not be found until spring thaw." Mrs. Adler's face had gone white, but her rifle remained steady. "Don't listen to him," she hissed. "He's trying to scare you into making a mistake." "Silas could be dying out there," Lydia's voice cracked. "Or he could be fine, and this is exactly the trap he warned you about." Mrs. Adler moved to another window, checking the perimeter. "The moment you step outside, you're at his mercy." Lydia's mind raced. Every instinct screamed at her to do whatever it took to save Silas, but she could hear his voice in her head, steady and sure. "Don't let Vane win." She pressed her forehead against the cold glass, trying to think through the panic. "I need proof," she called out. "Proof that my husband is actually in danger." There was a pause, then the sound of something hitting the porch. "Check your doorstep, Mrs. McCall, but do it carefully. My men have itchy trigger fingers in this weather." Mrs. Adler positioned herself by the door, rifle aimed, while Lydia cracked it open just wide enough to see. There, on the wooden planks, was Silas's hat, the one he'd been wearing when he left. It was torn and stained with what looked like blood. Her knees nearly buckled. "No," she whispered. "Now, do we have your attention?" Vane's voice was closer now, just beyond the porch. "Your husband is currently freezing to death in a ravine 20 miles north of here. Sign the papers, and I'll take you to him personally. You can even bring your housekeeper as insurance that I'll keep my word. And if I refuse, then I'll be back in the spring to make you a very generous offer on this property. As a widow, you'll find ranch life quite difficult. I'm sure you'll be eager to return to civilization." The threat was clear and cold. Lydia looked at Mrs. Adler, whose expression was torn between fury and fear. The older woman shook her head slightly, but her eyes said she would follow whatever Lydia decided. "Think." Lydia forced herself to breathe, to focus. What would Silas do? He'd look for the weakness in Vane's plan, the flaw in his logic, and suddenly she saw it. If Silas was really trapped and Vane knew exactly where, why hadn't he just left them to die? Why negotiate at all? Because he needs me to sign willingly. Because whatever happened, Silas is still alive enough to cause problems if the transfer isn't legal. "How do I know you'll keep your word?" she called out. "How do I know this isn't just a trick to get me outside?" "You don't." Vane sounded almost pleased. "But what choice do you have? Sit inside and hope I'm lying while your husband freezes? Or take a chance that I'm telling the truth? And you can save him?" A pause. "You have 5 minutes to decide. After that, we ride out. And whatever happens to Mr. McCall is on your conscience." Mrs. Adler grabbed Lydia's arm. "There's another way," she whispered urgently. "The root cellar has a tunnel, leads out to the barn, built it during the Indian troubles years back. You could slip out, get to the horses, and go where? Into a blizzard?" Lydia shook her head. "Even if I made it past them, I don't know where Silas is. I could search for days and freeze to death myself. Better than handing everything to that snake." "Not if Silas is really out there dying." Lydia made her decision with a clarity that surprised her. "I'm going with him, but I'm not signing anything until I see my husband alive." "That's suicide." "That's the only play we have." Lydia checked her pistol, making sure it was loaded. "If I'm wrong, if this is a trap, then you get word to the territorial governor, Jackson's friend in Cheyenne. He has all the evidence. Make sure Vane doesn't get away with this." Mrs. Adler's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "That boy's going to have my hide if I let you do this. Then we better make sure we both survive so he can yell at us together." Lydia managed a shaky smile. "Besides, I learned from the best. I'm stronger than I look." She moved to the door before she could lose her nerve. "Mr. Vane, I'll come with you, but I'm not signing anything until I see my husband with my own eyes and know he's alive. Take it or leave it." There was a long pause. Then, "Acceptable. But the housekeeper stays here. Insurance that you won't try anything foolish." "No." Mrs. Adler moved forward. "I'm not letting her go alone with those vultures." "It's all right," Lydia said quietly, squeezing the older woman's hand. "I'll be back. We both will." She raised her voice. "I'm coming out. Don't shoot." She opened the door slowly, her pistol deliberately holstered to show she wasn't looking for a fight. The cold hit her like a physical blow, snow driving into her face and stealing her breath. Through the white chaos, she could see Vane sitting his horse calmly, a heavy coat making him look even more imposing. 5 other men surrounded him, all armed, all watching her with the dead eyes of men who'd done violence before and would do it again without hesitation. Vane dismounted and walked up the porch steps with the confidence of a man who'd already won. Up close, he was handsome in a cold, reptilian way, fine features arranged into an expression of perpetual calculation. "Mrs. McCall, so glad you're being reasonable." He held out a folded paper. "The deed transfer, all ready for your signature. We'll fill in the date after you've seen your husband." Lydia took the paper but didn't look at it. "Where is he?" "North Ravine, like I said. About 2 hours' ride in good weather. In this?" He glanced at the storm. "Could be 4. We should leave now if we want to reach him before hypothermia does its work." "How do I know you're not just taking me out there to kill me?" Vane smiled, and it was the most frightening expression Lydia had ever seen, utterly devoid of warmth or humanity. Because you're worth more to me alive and signing papers than dead and making me wait for probate. I'm a businessman, Mrs. McCall, not a murderer. Murder is messy, legally complicated, and bad for profit margins. He gestured to a horse. Shall we? Lydia looked back at Mrs. Adler, standing in the doorway with her rifle and her fierce loyalty. She committed the image to memory, just in case, then nodded. One of Vane's men helped her mount, and she noticed his hands lingered a moment too long. She jerked away, and Vane barked out a sharp command. Keep your hands to yourself, Garrett. The lady is under my protection until business is concluded. The man fell back with a grunt, but his eyes promised retribution later if he got the chance. Lydia kept her expression neutral and gathered the reins, her mind already working on how to escape if this went wrong. They rode into the storm, Vane keeping close to her side while his men formed a loose perimeter. The snow was blinding, the wind screaming, and within minutes Lydia had lost all sense of direction. She was completely at their mercy, and they knew it. Tell me, Mrs. McCall, Vane said conversationally, as if they were riding through a park instead of a blizzard. What's it like being married to a stubborn fool? McCall could have sold to me months ago, taken a fair price, started over somewhere less contentious. Instead, he chose principle over pragmatism. And now look where that's gotten him. My husband is a man of integrity, Lydia said through numb lips. Something you wouldn't understand. Integrity. Vane tasted the word like spoiled wine. Integrity doesn't put food on the table or keep roofs from leaking. Integrity is a luxury for people who can afford it. Out here, it's a death sentence. Better to die with integrity than live as a coward. Vane laughed, genuinely amused. Oh, I see why he married you. You're as foolishly idealistic as he is. What a pair you make. Two stubborn children playing at ranching while the real world crushes you. Lydia didn't respond. She needed to conserve her energy, stay alert for any opportunity, but the cold was insidious, creeping into her bones despite her heavy coat. Her fingers were going numb inside her gloves, her face aching from the wind. How much worse must it be for Silas, if he was really out here injured and exposed? They rode for what felt like hours, but might have been less. Time became elastic in the whiteout, measured only by the increasing agony of cold and the growing fear that this would end badly. Finally, Vane held up a hand and the group stopped. Just over this ridge, he announced. Your husband awaits, Mrs. McCall. I do hope he's still breathing. They crested the rise, and Lydia's heart lurched. Below, barely visible through the snow, was a ravine with steep, rocky sides. And at the bottom, she could see shapes. Horses, men, the remains of what looked like a deliberate rock slide. Silas! She screamed his name, trying to urge her horse forward, but Vane grabbed her reins. Not yet. First, we discuss terms. You said I could see him. And so you shall, after you sign. He pulled out the paper again, now slightly damp from snow. Your signature, Mrs. McCall. Then we'll go down and see if there's anything left worth saving. Lydia's mind raced desperately. If she signed, she'd betray everything Silas had fought for. But if she didn't, he might die down there while they negotiated. Through the storm, she thought she saw movement in the ravine, someone stirring, still alive. Let me go to him first, she pleaded. Just let me see him, make sure he's alive, then I'll sign. I swear it. Vane studied her for a long moment, weighing her sincerity. You swear on what? Your word means nothing. I swear on his life. The words came out broken. I swear on everything that matters. Just let me go to him. Something in her desperation must have convinced him. Or perhaps he simply calculated that a woman who'd just watched her husband die would be even more compliant. Very well. But Garrett goes with you. Try anything stupid, and I'll have my men finish the job. Rock slide the rest of the ravine and bury everyone in it. Lydia nodded frantically. Garrett dismounted and grabbed her arm roughly, half dragging her down the steep slope. The rocks were slick with ice, and twice she fell, scraping her hands raw. But she barely felt it. All her focus was on the figures below, on finding Silas alive. They reached the bottom, and she saw them, Silas, Pete, and Jackson, huddled against the ravine wall. Silas was unconscious, a gash across his forehead still bleeding sluggishly. Pete was awake but clearly injured, holding his left arm at an odd angle. Jackson was trying to build a fire with numb fingers, but the wind kept stealing the flames. Silas! Lydia tore free from Garrett and threw herself down beside her husband. His skin was gray pale, his lips blue, but when she pressed her fingers to his throat, she felt a pulse, weak but present. "Oh God, Silas, wake up! Please wake up!" His eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glassy. "Lydia?" His voice was barely a whisper. "No. Shouldn't be here. Trap. I know it's a trap, but I couldn't leave you." She stripped off her gloves and pressed her warm hands to his frozen face. "Stay with me. Just stay with me." "The ranch," he mumbled. Don't give him—" "Shut up," she said fiercely, tears freezing on her cheeks. "Just shut up and stay alive. That's all I need from you right now." Pete spoke up, his voice rough with pain and cold. "They caused the rock slide. Waited until we were in the ravine, then triggered it. We've been trapped here since yesterday. No way out without climbing, and Silas took a rock to the head trying to shield Jackson. Garrett loomed over them, his hand on his pistol. Touching reunion. Now get up. Boss wants his signature." Lydia looked at Silas's gray face, at his trembling body trying desperately to generate warmth it didn't have. She looked at Pete and Jackson, both suffering, both depending on her to make the right choice. And she made it. "Tell Mr. Vane I need something to write with, and I need a fire started so my husband doesn't die before I finish signing." Garrett hesitated, then called up to the ridge. A brief negotiation followed, and one of the men rode down with a pencil and paper, along with materials for a fire. Lydia worked quickly, building a fire with Jackson's help, using techniques Silas had taught her. When the flames finally caught and held, she positioned Silas as close to the warmth as possible, wrapping him in her coat. "What are you doing?" Pete asked quietly. "You can't really be signing." "Watch me." She took the paper and pencil, her hands shaking, from cold, from fear, from the enormity of what she was about to do. She read through the deed transfer carefully, noting every clause, every word. Then she signed it. But she didn't sign Lydia McCall. She signed Catherine Hartley. It was a tiny act of defiance, a technicality that might mean nothing or might mean everything. The signature was clear and confident, and in the poor light and blowing snow, none of Vane's men looked closely enough to recognize it wasn't her legal name. "Here." She handed the paper to Garrett. "Now get us out of here." Garrett took the paper and scrambled back up the slope. Lydia heard voices above. Vane's triumphant laugh, then orders being shouted. Ropes were thrown down, and slowly, painfully, they began hauling the trapped men up. Silas regained consciousness during the climb, his hands gripping the rope with desperate strength. At the top, he collapsed into the snow, and Lydia fell beside him, checking his pupils, his pulse, his breathing. Concussion, definitely, but he was alive. They were all alive. Vane sat his horse, examining the signed paper with satisfaction. "Well done, Mrs. McCall. You've made the smart choice." He folded the paper carefully and tucked it inside his coat. "Garrett, help them onto horses. We'll drop them at the ranch and be done with this unpleasant business." But as they were being loaded onto horses, Lydia saw Jackson make eye contact with Pete, then deliberately stumble and fall against one of Vane's men. The man cursed and shoved him back, and in the chaos of snow and darkness, something passed from Jackson's hand to Pete's. The ride back to the ranch was agony. Silas drifted in and out of consciousness, slumped forward in the saddle while Lydia rode beside him, one hand on his back to keep him from falling. The storm had intensified, wind shrieking like something alive and furious, snow driving horizontally into their faces. When they finally reached the ranch, Mrs. Adler came running out, her face etched with relief and terror. She helped Lydia get Silas inside while Vane's men kept watch, making sure no one tried anything heroic. "Check his head wound," Lydia ordered, suddenly all business. "I need hot water, blankets, and whiskey. Pete's arm is broken, needs splinting. Jackson, can you walk?" "I'll manage," Jackson said through chattering teeth. Mrs. Adler worked with efficient speed, boiling water and gathering supplies. Lydia stripped Silas's wet clothes and wrapped him in every blanket they had, piling them over him until only his face showed. His skin was still dangerously pale, but his shivering had started again, a good sign. The body that could shiver was a body still fighting. Vane appeared in the doorway, watching the medical efforts with detached interest. How touching. All this fuss over a man who just lost everything he worked for. He held up the signed paper. This deed will be filed first thing Monday morning. You have until then to gather your personal belongings. After that, this property belongs to Consolidated Holdings, and you're all trespassing. Monday's 3 days away, Lydia said, without looking up from Silas's wound. Storm like this, you won't make it back to town tonight. We'll manage. But Vane was looking out at the blizzard with less confidence than his words suggested. The snow had become a solid white wall, visibility less than a foot. His horses were already ice-crusted and stumbling. Mrs. Adler straightened from splinting Pete's arm. You'll die in that, she said bluntly. Might be fine with killing others, but I doubt you're eager to freeze to death yourself. Vane's jaw tightened. Are you offering hospitality? I'm offering a barn and some blankets. You can sleep with the animals, where you belong. Come morning, if the storm breaks, you leave. Until then, we have a truce. Mrs. Adler's tone made it clear this wasn't negotiable. Your men touch anything, hurt anyone, or cause trouble, and I'll shoot you myself. Consequences be damned. For a moment, Vane looked ready to refuse. Then another gust of wind rattled the windows and practicality won over pride. Agreed, but someone stays awake to make sure you don't try anything foolish. Same here, Jackson said, his hand resting casually near his pistol. They settled into a hostile standoff. Vane's men in the barn under Jackson's watchful eye, everyone else in the house pretending to sleep while actually waiting for the next disaster. Lydia sat beside Silas, bathing his face with cool water, checking his breathing, willing him to wake up properly. Around midnight, his eyes finally opened with something like clarity. Lydia, he rasped, I'm here. She helped him sip water. Don't try to talk. You've got a concussion. The deed. You didn't. I signed it. She watched his face crumble with despair and rushed on. But not with my legal name. I signed Catherine Hartley. It took a moment for comprehension to dawn. Then, despite his pain, despite everything, Silas almost smiled. Catherine Hartley's signature on Lydia McCall's deed transfer. Worthless. Legally meaningless. Lydia gripped his hand. But Vane doesn't know that yet. And by the time he files it and discovers the problem, you'll be recovered enough to get to the territorial governor first. Risky, Pete said from across the room. When Vane figures it out, he'll come back angrier than ever. Let him try. Mrs. Adler was cleaning rifles with methodical precision. We'll be ready this time. Silas struggled to sit up, and Lydia helped him, propping pillows behind his back. What happened out there? How did he trap you? Planned ambush, Jackson spoke from his position by the window. They waited until we were in the narrowest part of the ravine, then triggered a prepared rock slide. Must have spent days setting it up. We never had a chance. Pete got me out from under the rocks, Silas said, his voice strengthening. Took a hit doing it, broke his arm. Worth it, Pete said simply. Can't let the best boss I ever had die in a ravine. The quiet loyalty in the words made Lydia's throat tight. These men weren't just employees, they were family, bound together by shared struggle and mutual respect. Thank you, she said to all of them. Thank you for keeping him alive. The storm blew itself out sometime before dawn. Lydia dozed fitfully in the chair beside Silas's bed, waking every few minutes to check his breathing. When gray light finally seeped through the windows, she heard movement in the barn. Vane's men preparing to leave. She met them in the yard, her pistol clearly visible on her hip. Vane looked haggard, his expensive clothes rumpled and covered in hay, but his eyes still held that cold calculation. A pleasure doing business with you, Mrs. McCall. He patted his coat where the deed was secured. I'll be seeing you Monday when the sheriff comes to enforce the eviction. You do that. Lydia kept her voice level, betraying nothing. I'm sure it will be very enlightening for everyone involved. Something in her tone made him pause, eyes narrowing with suspicion. But then he shook his head, dismissing whatever concern had flickered through his mind. Enjoy your last few days here. I hear winters are harsh for people without shelter. They rode out, and Lydia stood watching until they disappeared over the ridge. Then her knees gave out, and she sat hard in the snow, shaking with delayed reaction. Mrs. Adler appeared beside her, helping her up with strong, capable hands. Come inside before you freeze. That man isn't worth catching your death over. Inside, Silas was awake and trying to get out of bed. Lydia rushed to stop him. What are you doing? You need to rest. No time. He swayed but stayed upright through sheer will. We have 3 days to get to Cheyenne, file a complaint with the governor, and expose Vane's entire operation. Can't do that lying in bed. You can barely stand. Then help me. He gripped her shoulders, his eyes burning with fierce determination. This is our one chance, Lydia. The moment Vane tries to file that deed, we need to be there with the real evidence, the railroad documents, everything. We need to bury him before he figures out what you did. She wanted to argue, to force him back to bed, to protect him from his own stubborn courage. But she saw the same fire in his eyes that had made him stand between her and Marcus Vane that first day, that had made him choose her over easier options, that had made him fight for their home against impossible odds. All right, she said finally, but I'm coming with you, and if you fall off your horse, I'm tying you to the saddle. Despite everything, he smiled. Deal. Mrs. Adler packed supplies with grim efficiency while Jackson saddled horses. Pete, his arm in a sling, insisted on coming too. You'll need witnesses, people who saw what Vane did firsthand. They left within the hour, racing against time and Vane's inevitable discovery of the fraud. The journey to Cheyenne was brutal. Silas fighting pain and exhaustion every mile, Lydia constantly watching him for signs he was failing, all of them aware that this was their last desperate gamble. They reached Cheyenne on Saturday evening, exhausted and half-frozen. Jackson's friend Samuel met them with hot food and urgent news. Vane's in town, Samuel reported grimly. Arrived this afternoon, already spreading word that he's filing the McCall deed Monday morning, acting like he's already won. Then we file first thing Sunday morning, Silas said. Can we get to the territorial office before official hours? Governor's secretary lives above the office. If we knock loud enough, she might answer. Samuel looked at their haggard faces. You all need rest. You look like death. We'll rest when this is over, Lydia said firmly. Right now, we need to prepare our case. They worked through the night in Samuel's small office, organizing documents, preparing testimony, crafting a letter to the governor that laid out Vane's crimes in stark detail. Lydia wrote it, her elegant Boston education finally proving useful, while Silas and Pete provided facts and Jackson cross-referenced property records. By dawn, they had an airtight case: fraud, extortion, attempted murder, conspiracy to defraud the territorial government. If the governor took them seriously, Vane was finished. Sunday morning, they stood before the territorial office as the sun rose. Silas looked gray and unsteady, but his hand was firm when he knocked on the door. Once, twice, 3 times. Finally, a window opened above. A woman's face appeared, irritated and suspicious. We're closed on Sundays. Come back tomorrow. Ma'am, my name is Silas McCall, and I need to file an urgent complaint with the governor regarding fraud and attempted murder. It can't wait until tomorrow. Everything can wait until tomorrow, she said, starting to close the window. Marcus Vane is attempting to steal property through forged documents, Lydia called up desperately. We have proof of his crimes, but if we wait until tomorrow, he'll have already filed false deeds and disappeared with property that doesn't belong to him. The window stopped closing. Marcus Vane, you said? Yes, ma'am. We have witnesses, documents, everything you need. The woman's face underwent a transformation, suspicion shifting to sharp interest. Wait there. 5 minutes later, the door opened. The woman, middle-aged, sharp-eyed, radiating competence, gestured them inside. I'm Sarah Mitchell, the governor's secretary, and you're in luck. The governor's been wanting to nail Marcus Vane for over a year now. That man's made enemies in every county, but he's been too slippery to catch. She looked at their exhausted faces. You look like you've got a story worth hearing. Come in and tell me everything. They talked for 3 hours, laying out everything: the harassment, the fire, the threats, the orchestrated rock slide. They showed her the evidence Jackson had gathered, the property records, the connections to the railroad. They produced the threatening notes, the matchbox, the flask with Vane's initials. And finally, Lydia explained the forged signature and pulled out the original transfer paper with Catherine Hartley's name signed clearly at the bottom. Sarah Mitchell studied the signature with growing satisfaction. This is fraud. Clear, provable fraud. And you say he's planning to file this tomorrow? First thing Monday morning, Silas confirmed. He thinks it's legitimate, thinks he's won. Then we'll be there to greet him. Sarah stood decisively. I'll have the territorial marshal waiting at the land office with arrest warrants. The governor will want to be present for this. He loves catching criminals in the act. She looked at them with something like admiration. You people are either very brave or very foolish, maybe both. We're people who got tired of being pushed around, Lydia said quietly. That's all. Monday morning dawned clear and cold. They stood in the land office, Silas, Lydia, Pete, Jackson, Sarah Mitchell, the territorial governor himself, and 3 marshals, waiting. Marcus Vane arrived precisely at 9 o'clock, walking in with the confidence of a man who thought he had already won. He held the deed transfer carefully, a smile playing at his lips. The smile died when he saw the assembled crowd. Mr. Vane, Governor Harrison said pleasantly. How convenient. We were just discussing you. Governor, Vane recovered quickly, his expression smoothing into professional courtesy. I'm here to file a property transfer. Standard business. Let's see that transfer, shall we? Vane handed it over, and the governor studied it carefully. This appears to be signed by Lydia McCall, transferring property rights to Consolidated Holdings. He looked up. Is that accurate, Mrs. McCall? No, sir, Lydia said clearly. I never signed that document. Vane's face went white, then red. That's absurd. I watched her sign it. You watched someone sign something, Lydia corrected. But if you look closely, you'll see that's not my signature. That's Catherine Hartley's signature. And Catherine Hartley has no legal right to transfer property belonging to Lydia McCall. The governor's eyebrows rose. Is this true, Mr. Vane? You accepted a signature from someone who wasn't the legal property owner. She told me she was... Vane sputtered, his composure cracking. This is a trick. She deliberately defrauded me. Interesting choice of words, Governor Harrison said dryly, because we were just reviewing some very disturbing allegations about your business practices. Extortion, arson, attempted murder, fraud. He nodded to the marshals. Gentlemen, I believe you have work to do. The marshals moved forward, and Vane finally understood. You can't prove any of this. It's their word against mine. Actually, we can prove quite a bit. The governor pulled out the flask with Vane's initials. This was found at the scene of an arson. We also have testimony from 6 witnesses regarding the rock slide that nearly killed 3 men. We have documented patterns of property acquisition that suggest systematic fraud. And we have your own signed letters threatening landowners. He smiled coldly. Mr. Vane, you're under arrest. Marshal Kane, read him his rights. Watching Marcus Vane being led away in chains was one of the sweetest moments of Lydia's life. The man who'd terrorized them, who'd tried to steal their home, who'd nearly killed her husband, brought down by his own arrogance and greed. Silas put his arm around her waist, and she leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of him, alive and victorious. We did it, she whispered. You did it, he corrected. That signature trick, that was brilliant. I learned from the best. She looked up at him. You taught me to fight smart, not just hard. Governor Harrison approached them, his expression warm. Mr. and Mrs. McCall, the territory owes you a debt of gratitude. Vane's been a cancer on legitimate business for too long. Your courage in standing up to him has saved dozens of other ranchers from similar fates. Just wanted to protect our home, sir, Silas said simply. Well, you've done that and more. I'll personally ensure that Vane's conviction is swift and comprehensive. He won't trouble you again. The governor shook Silas's hand firmly, then surprised Lydia by shaking hers as well. Mrs. McCall, your resourcefulness is remarkable. If you ever tire of ranch life, the territorial government could use someone with your intellect and courage. Lydia laughed, the sound bright with relief and joy. Thank you, sir. But I think I've had enough excitement for one lifetime. I just want to go home. And that's exactly what they did. The journey home from Cheyenne took 2 full days, but this time the miles felt different, lighter somehow, as if the very air had changed with Marcus Vane's arrest. Silas was still healing, his head wound bandaged and his movements careful, but there was a lightness to his expression that Lydia hadn't seen before. The weight he'd been carrying for months had finally lifted. They stopped the first night at a small inn halfway between Cheyenne and Pine Hollow. It was a rough place, more barn than hotel, but it had a fire and hot food and beds that didn't move. Pete and Jackson took one room while Silas and Lydia took another, and for the first time since their wedding, they had true privacy without the shadow of danger hanging over them. Lydia helped Silas out of his coat, her fingers gentle on his shoulders. The bruises from the rock slide were turning spectacular shades of purple and yellow, and she winced at each new discovery. "You should have been killed," she said quietly, unbuttoning his shirt to check the bandages on his ribs. "I know." He caught her hand, stilling them. "When those rocks started falling, I thought that was it. Thought I'd never see you again." His voice roughened. "All I could think about was you, how you'd manage alone, whether you'd be safe, whether you'd know how much I loved you." "I knew." She pressed her palm flat against his chest, feeling his heartbeat steady and strong beneath the bruises. "I've always known, even when we were both too scared to say it." He pulled her close, careful of his injuries, and they stood like that for a long moment, just breathing together, alive together, triumphant together. When he finally kissed her, it was slow and deep and full of promises about the future they'd fought so hard to secure. "We're going to have a good life," he murmured against her lips. "The kind of life we both deserve." "We already do," she whispered back. "We already do." They made love that night with the tenderness of people who'd come too close to losing everything. Every touch was reverent, every kiss a celebration of survival. And afterward, wrapped in each other's arms beneath rough blankets in a stranger's inn, they slept more peacefully than they had in months. Morning brought them closer to home. The landscape grew familiar again, the particular way the mountains rose against the sky, the bend of the creek that marked the boundary of their property, the stand of cottonwoods where Silas had first taught her to shoot. Everything looked the same, but Lydia saw it differently now. This wasn't just land. This was what they'd bled for, what they'd risked everything to protect. Every acre meant something. Mrs. Adler must have been watching for them because she came running out of the house before they'd even dismounted, her usual stern composure cracking into something like relief. "Thank God," she said, her hands checking Silas over with maternal efficiency. "When you didn't come back Saturday, I thought—" She stopped, unable to voice the fear. "We're fine," Silas assured her. "Better than fine. Vane's in jail, and we've got the territorial governor's personal guarantee that our land rights are secure." Mrs. Adler's eyes went bright with tears she was too stubborn to shed. "Good, good. That snake deserved worse than jail, but I'll take what I can get." She turned to Lydia, and for the first time since they'd met, pulled her into a quick, fierce hug. "You did good, girl. Real good." The unexpected embrace caught Lydia completely off guard, and she found herself hugging back, understanding that this was Mrs. Adler's way of saying all the things she couldn't put into words. Acceptance, respect, something very much like love. The other ranch hands emerged from various tasks, gathering around to hear the full story. Silas told it simply, giving credit where it was due. To Lydia's quick thinking with the signature, to Jackson's friend Samuel's help with evidence, to Pete's courage in the ravine. The men listened with satisfaction, and when the tale was done, old Pete raised his coffee cup in a toast. "To the McCalls," he said simply. "May they never have another year like this one." "I'll drink to that," Jackson agreed. And they all did, even Mrs. Adler, who normally frowned on drinking before noon. The winter that followed was indeed brutal, just as Silas had predicted. Snow came early and stayed late, piling in drifts that reached the eaves and turning the ranch into an isolated island in a sea of white. For weeks at a time, they couldn't reach Pine Hollow, couldn't see beyond their own property boundaries, couldn't do anything but hunker down and endure. But the isolation that might once have felt like imprisonment now felt like sanctuary. The house that had seemed cold and unwelcoming when Lydia first arrived became a warm cocoon of domestic comfort. She and Silas fell into routines that felt both mundane and precious. Morning coffee together before he went out to check on the animals, afternoons when she'd bring lunch to wherever he was working, evenings by the fire where they'd read aloud or just sit in comfortable silence. Mrs. Adler taught Lydia to cook properly during those long winter months, grudging lessons that gradually became something more like companionship. "You've got good instincts," the older woman said one afternoon, watching Lydia knead bread with competent hands. "Takes most city girls years to figure out that cooking's about feel as much as recipe. You picked it up in months. I had a good teacher, Lydia replied, and meant it. The older woman's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. You're all right, Lydia McCall. Never thought I'd say that about any woman Silas brought home, but you're all right. It was the highest praise Mrs. Adler had ever given anyone, and Lydia treasured it accordingly. Silas's head wound healed slowly but completely. The scar it left was hidden by his hair, just another mark added to the collection he already carried. His ribs took longer, and Lydia learned to read the subtle signs of pain he tried to hide. The careful way he moved first thing in the morning, the slight catch in his breathing when he lifted something heavy. She didn't coddle him, understanding instinctively that he'd hate that, but she made sure he had hot baths to soak in and liniment for the aches, and she didn't comment when he needed to rest more than he used to. Getting old, he joked one evening, lowering himself into his chair with a barely suppressed wince. Getting smart, she corrected, learning that healing takes time. He pulled her into his lap, ignoring his protesting ribs. When did you get so wise? Must have rubbed off from being married to you. He kissed her nose. Flatterer. Truth-teller, she insisted, and kissed him properly to prove it. News from town filtered in slowly through the occasional visitor who braved the snow. Marcus Vane had been tried quickly, the evidence against him overwhelming. He'd been sentenced to 15 years in territorial prison for fraud, extortion, and attempted murder. His assets had been seized and were being sold off to compensate his victims. Consolidated Holdings had withdrawn from the territory entirely, the railroad deal falling through when Vane's corruption came to light. Elizabeth Hartwick, they heard, had left Pine Hollow entirely, moving to San Francisco where her beauty might find a more appreciative audience. The news meant nothing to Silas. That chapter of his life had closed completely, but Lydia felt a petty satisfaction knowing that the woman who'd rejected him for his scars had missed out on everything that mattered. January gave way to February, and the worst of the winter began to ease. The days grew incrementally longer, the cold less vicious, the snow starting to melt in patches where the sun hit strongest. And with the spring thaw came changes neither of them had anticipated, but both welcomed with cautious joy. Lydia missed her monthly courses. Once might have been stress or cold or any number of things, but when she missed the second time, she knew. She stood in the kitchen one morning, her hand pressed flat against her still flat stomach, and felt fear and excitement warring inside her. Mrs. Adler found her like that, one hand on her belly and tears streaming down her face. The older woman took one look and knew. How far along? She asked gently. 2 months, I think. Maybe a little more. Lydia looked up, her eyes wide. I haven't told him yet. I don't know how. What if something goes wrong? What if... Stop borrowing trouble. Mrs. Adler squeezed her shoulder. You're young and strong and healthy. No reason to think anything will go wrong. And Silas? Her expression softened. That boy's going to be over the moon. She was right. When Lydia finally worked up the courage to tell him that evening, pulling him aside after dinner and stumbling through the words, Silas's face went through a dozen emotions in as many seconds. Shock, disbelief, wonder, fierce protective joy. A baby, he whispered, his hand coming to rest reverently on her stomach. We're having a baby. I'm scared, she admitted. I don't know how to be a mother. I don't know if I'll be good at it. You'll be extraordinary, he said with absolute certainty. You're extraordinary at everything you do. He pulled her close, cradling her against his chest. A baby. Our baby. God, Lydia, I never thought, after everything, I never let myself hope for this. Are you happy? She asked, needing to hear it. Happy? He laughed, the sound full of incredulous joy. Happy doesn't begin to cover it. I'm terrified and thrilled and grateful and about 100 other things I don't have words for. He kissed her forehead, her nose, her lips. You're giving me a family, a real family. How could I be anything but happy? The pregnancy changed things in subtle ways. Silas became even more protective, trying to take on tasks she'd normally handle herself. She had to remind him repeatedly that she was pregnant, not made of glass, and that women had been doing ranch work while carrying babies since ranches were invented. You're not most women, he argued. You're my wife, the mother of my child. I'm allowed to worry. You're allowed to worry reasonably, she corrected. Not hover like I'm going to shatter at any moment. They compromised. She kept working but let him handle the heaviest tasks, and he stopped acting like she might break if she lifted anything heavier than a teacup. It was a negotiation, like everything else in their marriage, built on respect and communication and the growing certainty that they were partners in every sense of the word. March brought the first real signs of spring. The snow retreated to shaded hollows, the creek swelled with runoff, and green began to show through the brown prairie grass. Silas and the hands threw themselves into spring work, repairing winter damage, checking on cattle that had weathered the season, preparing fields for planting. It was exhausting, endless labor, but there was satisfaction in it too, the knowledge that they were building something lasting. One afternoon in early April, a rider came from town, young Tim from the Mercantile, carrying a letter sealed with official-looking wax. Silas opened it while standing in the yard, Lydia reading over his shoulder. It was from Governor Harrison, brief and formal. The investigation into Marcus Vane's activities had uncovered evidence of crimes far beyond what they'd suspected. Fraud stretching back years, dozens of victimized landowners, connections to political corruption in multiple territories. Vane's sentence had been extended to 30 years, and he would likely never walk free again. The governor thanked them again for their courage in coming forward and enclosed a small reward from the territorial fund for citizens who helped expose corruption. The reward was enough to rebuild the burned corral twice over and have money left for improvements. Silas stared at the banknote for a long moment, then handed it to Lydia. "Your call," he said simply. "What should we do with it?" She thought about all the things they could use: new equipment, better stock, repairs to the house. But she also thought about the Henderson family, burned out and struggling, and about all the other ranchers Vane had hurt over the years. "Half to the Hendersons," she said. "They need it more than we do. The other half we use to start a fund, something to help ranchers who fall on hard times. Call it the Wyoming Ranchers Relief Fund or something official sounding." She looked at him. "We got lucky, Silas. We had good people helping us. Not everyone does. Maybe we can be that help for others." The expression on his face was everything: pride and love and admiration all mixed together. "Have I mentioned lately that you're extraordinary?" "Not in the last hour," she teased. He kissed her there in the yard, not caring that Tim was watching with teenage embarrassment, not caring about anything except the woman in his arms and the future they were building together. Word of the fund spread quickly through the county. Other ranchers, grateful for the help Silas and Lydia had provided in exposing Vane, contributed what they could. By summer, the fund had grown enough to actually make a difference, helping 2 families rebuild after fires and another who'd lost most of their herd to disease. Lydia administered it from their kitchen table, keeping careful records and making sure every dollar went where it was needed most. "You've become quite the businesswoman," Silas observed one evening, watching her work through correspondence with various ranchers. "Just doing what needs doing," she said, but she was pleased. It felt good to help, to use her education and organizational skills for something meaningful. She'd spent so many years in Boston feeling useless, a burden, someone whose only value was supposed to be in her appearance, and even there she'd been found lacking. Here she mattered. What she did mattered. Who she was mattered. Her pregnancy progressed without complications. By June, she was showing clearly, her dresses getting tighter until Mrs. Adler took pity on her and helped her sew new ones with extra room. The baby moved constantly, especially at night, and Silas would lie with his hand on her belly, feeling the kicks and tumbles with wonder. "Strong," he'd murmur. "Got your mother's spirit already." "Or your stubborn streak," Lydia would counter, but she loved these moments, the quiet intimacy of shared anticipation, of waiting together for the child who would make their family complete. Summer brought its own rhythms, long days of work interspersed with brief moments of rest. The ranch prospered in ways it hadn't in years. The cattle were healthy, the hay crop abundant, the horses breeding well. It was as if the land itself had decided to reward them for their perseverance. One evening in late July, Silas found Lydia sitting on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. She was 7 months along now, her belly round and prominent, and she moved with the careful deliberation of someone carrying precious cargo. Thinking deep thoughts? He asked, settling beside her. Thinking about the day I arrived, she said softly. How terrified I was. How certain I was that you'd take one look at me and send me right back. She touched her birthmark unconsciously, that old familiar gesture. I thought my mark made me unlovable, unwanted, a mistake. Silas covered her hand with his, pressing it gently against her cheek. You were never a mistake, never unwanted. Maybe we found each other in an unconventional way, but I believe we were always meant to find each other somehow. You don't believe in fate? She reminded him. He'd told her that once, months ago. I didn't, he agreed, but you made me reconsider. How else do you explain two people, both marked by life in different ways, both looking for something they couldn't name, finding each other across a continent and building something this good? He leaned over and kissed her birthmark gently, then moved to her lips. If that's not fate, I don't know what is. August brought heat that shimmered off the prairie and waves and made Lydia grateful for the deep shade of the porch. She was huge now, moving slowly, sleeping poorly, ready for the pregnancy to be done. Mrs. Adler had begun making preparations for the birth, gathering linens, sterilizing instruments, laying in supplies of the herbs and tinctures she swore by for helping labor along. Doc Peterson from town will come if we need him, Silas said one evening, his face showing the worry he tried to hide. I've already sent word that when your time comes, we'll ride for him. By the time he got here, the baby would probably already be born, Lydia said practically. Women have been doing this since the beginning of time, Silas. With Mrs. Adler here, I'll be fine. But his fear was palpable, and she understood it. His mother had died of fever 3 years ago, and though it hadn't been childbirth, the memory of losing her still haunted him. The thought of losing Lydia the same way was clearly eating at him. She took his face in her hands, making him look at her. I'm strong, I'm healthy, and I'm not going anywhere. You hear me? I fought too hard for this life to give it up now. Promise me, he said roughly. Promise me you'll fight. If something goes wrong, promise me you'll fight to stay with me. I promise, she whispered. We both promise. She guided his hand to her belly, where the baby was doing acrobatics. This little one's a fighter too, takes after both of us. The baby came on a Tuesday in early September, arriving with the same stubborn determination that had characterized everything else in their lives. Lydia's water broke just after dawn, and by the time Mrs. Adler got her settled in bed, the contractions were already strong and regular. Going to be quick, Mrs. Adler predicted. First babies usually take their time, but this one's in a hurry. She was right. 7 hours later, as afternoon sunlight slanted through the bedroom windows, Lydia bore down one final time and felt the baby slip free in a rush of relief and pain. The infant's first cry was loud and indignant, and Lydia started laughing and crying simultaneously. A girl, Mrs. Adler announced, cleaning the baby with efficient gentleness. Perfect little girl, with good lungs, and all her fingers and toes. She wrapped the infant in soft cloth and placed her in Lydia's arms. Say hello to your daughter. Lydia looked down at the tiny face, scrunched and red and absolutely beautiful, and felt her heart expand in ways she hadn't known were possible. The baby's eyes opened briefly, dark blue, unfocused, searching, and Lydia fell completely, irrevocably in love. Hello, sweetheart, she whispered. I'm your mama. Silas had been banished to the porch during the birth, pacing and worrying despite Mrs. Adler's orders to make himself useful elsewhere. Now he appeared in the doorway, his face pale with anxiety. Lydia? His voice cracked slightly. Is everything? Come meet your daughter, she said, smiling through happy tears. He crossed the room slowly, almost reverently, and looked down at the baby in Lydia's arms. His expression transformed, anxiety melting into wonder, fear into awe, worry into pure, uncomplicated joy. She's perfect, he breathed. Absolutely perfect. His finger traced the baby's tiny hand, and her miniature fingers wrapped around his automatically. Strong grip. That's good. Want to hold her? Lydia asked. He looked terrified at the prospect, but nodded. She helped him position his arms correctly, and then the baby was in his embrace, tiny and trusting against his broad chest. Silas looked down at his daughter with an expression of such fierce, protective love that Lydia felt tears sting her eyes again. What should we name her? He asked softly. They discussed names for months without deciding. But looking at her now, Lydia knew. Rose, she said, for beauty that grows in harsh places, for strength that doesn't need to be loud. Rose McCall, Silas tested the name, smiling. I like it. Rose Eleanor McCall. After my mother? Perfect, Lydia agreed. Mrs. Adler had retreated to give them privacy, but now she returned with broth and bread for Lydia. Baby's healthy, mother's healthy, father looks like he might pass out from too much emotion, she reported with satisfaction. All in all, a successful day. She paused at the door, her expression softening. You done good, all of you, real good. The weeks after Rose's birth were a blur of sleepless nights and steep learning curves. The baby was healthy but demanding, wanting to nurse constantly and protesting loudly when anything displeased her. Lydia was exhausted, sore, and blissfully happy. Silas was beside himself with parental devotion, jumping at every cry, convinced that each whimper meant disaster. She's fine, Lydia assured him for the 100th time at 2 a.m. She's just hungry, again. How can something so small need to eat so often? He wondered, watching Lydia nurse with the fascination of someone witnessing a miracle. Growing takes energy, she said, stroking Rose's soft, dark hair. The baby had gotten Silas's coloring, dark hair and those serious gray-blue eyes that already seemed to see everything. She's beautiful, Silas said softly. Like her mother. Lydia looked up at him, this man who had chosen her when the world had spent 23 years telling her she wasn't enough. I used to hate my birthmark, she said quietly. Spent my whole life wishing I could cut it off, burn it away, anything to be rid of it. But now? She looked down at their perfect daughter. Now I'm grateful for it. Why? Silas asked, though his eyes suggested he already knew. Because it brought me here. If I'd been the pretty one, if I'd been Catherine, I never would have been desperate enough to take this chance, never would have crossed the country, never would have met you. She smiled through sudden tears. My mark led me home. He leaned over and kissed her birthmark gently, then kissed her lips, then kissed the top of their sleeping daughter's head. Then I'm grateful for it too. Grateful for every twist of fate that brought us together. October arrived with crisp mornings and brilliant aspens turning gold on the mountainsides. Rose was 6 weeks old now, filling out into a chubby, alert baby who seemed to find everything fascinating. She would lie on a blanket on the porch, watching leaves blow past with intense concentration, or stare up at her father's face with such serious attention that he'd start talking to her like she could understand every word. Today we're going to check the north fence, he'd tell her gravely. Important work, keeping boundaries clear and predators out. When you're older, I'll teach you to ride those fence lines yourself. She's 6 weeks old, Silas, Lydia would laugh. Give her time to learn to sit up before you put her on a horse. Never too early to start planning her education, he'd counter, but his eyes would be twinkling. One afternoon, a visitor arrived, Judge Whitmore, making his circuit through the county. He accepted coffee and cake with the air of a man who'd seen many things in his years and found very little surprising anymore. But when he looked at Lydia holding Rose, his expression softened. Heard you folks had quite a year, he said. Marcus Vane, the deed fraud, the territorial governor's involvement, made quite a splash in legal circles. We just wanted to protect our home, Silas said simply. You did more than that. Vane's conviction has led to reforms in how property transfers are recorded and verified. Harder now for speculators to prey on desperate landowners. Judge Whitmore sipped his coffee. You two started something bigger than you know. The Ranchers' Relief Fund was Lydia's idea, Silas said, his pride obvious. She administers it from our kitchen table, helped 6 families so far. The judge looked at Lydia with new respect. The territory needs more people like you, Mrs. McCall, people willing to fight for what's right and then build something positive from the rubble. He finished his coffee and stood. I should be getting on. Just wanted to stop by and see how you folks were managing. Clearly, you're doing just fine. After he left, Lydia sat on the porch with Rose in her arms, watching Silas work with one of the young horses in the corral. The afternoon light turned everything golden, the prairie grass, the distant mountains, her husband's hair as he moved with patient skill. This was her life now. This was her home. These were her people. She thought about the girl she'd been in Boston, frightened, marked, convinced she had no value. She thought about Catherine Hartley, who'd given up this chance because she wanted adventure and excitement instead of steady partnership and real work. She wondered where Catherine was now, whether she'd found what she was looking for, whether she ever thought about the identity she'd abandoned. Mostly, though, Lydia felt grateful. Grateful for the desperation that had pushed her onto that stagecoach. Grateful for Silas's unexpected acceptance. Grateful for Mrs. Adler's grudging wisdom and the loyalty of men like Pete and Jackson. Grateful for the baby in her arms and the life they were building together, one day at a time. November brought the first serious snows of the season. They prepared for another winter of isolation, but this time Lydia faced it without fear. She had everything she needed within these walls: her husband, her daughter, their small but loyal household. The rest of the world could disappear under snow for months, and they would be fine. One evening, after Rose had finally fallen asleep and Mrs. Adler had retired to her cabin, Silas pulled Lydia close on the sofa before the fire. They sat in comfortable silence, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist, watching flames dance and listening to wind howl outside. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked suddenly. "Boston, civilization, all the things you gave up to be here?" Lydia thought about it honestly. "I miss good bookstores," she admitted, "and theater sometimes. The ocean." She tilted her head to look up at him. "But I don't miss the person I was there. That frightened girl who let other people define her worth, who thought her birthmark made her less than human." "You were never less than," Silas said fiercely. "I know that now. You taught me that." She reached up and touched his scarred arm through his sleeve. "We taught each other that the marks we carry don't define us. They just prove we've lived. We've survived. We've become stronger in the broken places." He kissed her then, slow and deep and full of everything words couldn't capture. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. "I love you," he said simply, "more than I knew it was possible to love anyone. You and Rose, you're my whole world." "I love you too," she whispered back. "You gave me a home when I was homeless, gave me worth when I thought I was worthless, gave me a family when I was alone." She pressed her hand to his chest, feeling his heartbeat steady and strong. "You gave me everything that matters." They made love slowly in front of the fire, their bodies familiar now, comfortable with each other in ways that went deeper than passion. It was intimate and tender and healing, a physical manifestation of everything they'd built together, trust and partnership and love grown strong through adversity. Afterward, wrapped in blankets and each other, Silas traced patterns on her back and said, "I have a confession to make." "Oh?" She propped herself up to look at him. "Should I be worried?" "That day you arrived, when you stepped off the stage and told me there'd been a mistake." He smiled slightly. "I knew immediately you weren't the woman from the letters. Catherine had described herself pretty clearly. Blonde hair, blue eyes, dimples. You were nothing like that." Lydia's eyes widened. "You knew from the beginning?" "I knew you weren't Catherine Hartley," he confirmed, "but I also knew you needed help. Could see it in your eyes, that desperate hope mixed with terror. And I thought, why not? I needed a wife. You needed a home. Seemed like a fair trade." He touched her birthmark gently. "Didn't realize until later that I was getting so much more than I bargained for." "Why didn't you say something? Why let me confess if you already knew?" "Because you needed to say it. Needed to be honest, even if it was hard. And I needed to show you that honesty wouldn't cost you everything." He pulled her back against his chest. "Besides, I liked you better than the woman from the letters. Catherine sounded flighty, shallow. You had substance, strength, the kind of strength that comes from surviving hard things." "You saw all that in 5 minutes?" "I saw enough." He was quiet for a moment. "My mother used to say that God puts people in our path for a reason. When you stepped off that stage, wrong bride, wrong name, convinced you weren't enough, I thought maybe this was the reason. Maybe you were exactly who I needed, and I just didn't know it yet." Lydia felt tears slipping down her cheeks. "Your mother was right." "She usually was," Silas agreed softly. "Wish she could have met you. She would have loved you." I wish I could have met her too. Lydia kissed his chest right over his heart. But I like to think she'd be proud of us, proud of what we've built. I know she would be. They fell asleep like that, tangled together before the dying fire. And when Rose woke crying an hour later, they got up together to tend to her, partners in everything, facing each midnight feeding as a team just like they'd faced everything else. Winter deepened, but inside the ranch house, warmth prevailed. Rose grew and thrived, hitting milestones that Silas recorded with the dedication of someone chronicling great historical events. Her first smile, her first laugh, a delighted gurgle at one of Mrs. Adler's gruff faces that made the stern woman go suspiciously soft. The day she rolled over on her own. Each moment was celebrated, treasured, added to the growing collection of memories they were building. The ranch continued to prosper. Word had spread about Silas and Lydia's stand against Marcus Vane, and other ranchers began seeking them out for advice, for partnership, for the kind of honest dealing that had become rare. The relief fund grew, helping more families each month. And Lydia found herself becoming a voice for change, writing letters to the territorial legislature about land reform, about protections for small ranchers, about the need for better law enforcement in rural areas. You're becoming quite the activist, Silas observed one evening, reading over one of her letters. Just trying to make sure what happened to us doesn't happen to others, she said. We got lucky, Silas. We had resources and friends and just enough knowledge to fight back. Not everyone does. So you're going to be their voice. Someone has to be. She looked at him seriously. Is that all right? I know it takes time away from ranch work, but it feels important. He pulled her close and kissed her forehead. It is important, and I'm proud of you for doing it. We'll make the ranch work around it. He smiled. Besides, Mrs. Adler's been training you to take over more of the household management. Between the two of you, I'm starting to feel unnecessary. Never unnecessary, Lydia assured him. Just well supported. Christmas came, and they celebrated simply. A small tree decorated with strings of dried fruit and paper stars that Lydia made during Rose's naps. Gifts were practical, but heartfelt. Mrs. Adler gave Lydia a recipe book filled with handwritten instructions for every dish she'd taught her. Silas gave her a beautiful leather-bound journal for recording her thoughts and correspondence. And Lydia gave him a new watch to replace the one damaged in the rock slide, with an inscription inside the cover. Time spent with you is time well spent. All my love, L. He held it for a long moment, his eyes suspiciously bright. It's perfect, he said roughly. You're perfect. We're perfect, she corrected. Together. They rang in the new year quietly, just the two of them, and Rose sleeping in her cradle nearby. At midnight, Silas raised a glass of whiskey and said, To 1878. May it be considerably less dramatic than 1877. I'll drink to that, Lydia laughed, clinking her glass against his. But as the new year unfolded, they found that some drama was welcome. In February, Mrs. Adler announced that she was getting married, to old Pete, of all people. They'd apparently been courting quietly for months, finding companionship in their shared history and complementary temperaments. Didn't want to make a fuss, Mrs. Adler said gruffly when Lydia exclaimed over the news. We're too old for romantic foolishness, but Pete's a good man, and I'm tired of sleeping alone. Seemed practical. It's wonderful, Lydia said, hugging her, and you deserve happiness. Both of you. They married in March, a simple ceremony in the ranch house with Judge Whitmore presiding. Lydia cried through the whole thing, watching these two tough, weathered people promise to cherish each other for whatever time they had left. It was a reminder that love came in many forms, at many ages, and was always worth celebrating. Mrs. Adler, now Mrs. Adler Thompson, moved into Pete's cottage, though she still managed the main house and cooked most of the meals. Not about to let this place fall apart just because I got married, she declared. But there was a new softness to her, a lightness that came from finally letting someone close after years of protective isolation. Spring brought renewal in 1,000 small ways. Rose learned to sit up, then to crawl, then to pull herself to standing while holding on to furniture. She was a serious baby, watching everything with intense concentration. But when she smiled, it was like sunrise, sudden and brilliant and transforming. Both Silas and Lydia were completely besotted with her, tracking her every move and exclaiming over each tiny accomplishment as if no baby in history had ever done anything so remarkable. "We're insufferable parents," Lydia admitted to Silas one evening. "Completely insufferable," he agreed cheerfully. "And I don't care, she's extraordinary." In May, they rode into Pine Hollow for the spring dance, their first real social outing since Rose's birth. Lydia wore a new dress she'd made herself, and Silas wore his good suit, and they brought Rose bundled carefully in her basket. Mrs. Chen from the mercantile cooed over the baby, while the other townspeople gradually gathered around to meet the child they'd heard so much about. "She looks just like Silas," someone observed. "Got her mother's determination, though," Pete said, and everyone laughed because Rose was currently trying to grab everything within reach with single-minded focus. When the dancing started, Silas held out his hand to Lydia. "May I have this dance, Mrs. McCall?" "You may, Mr. McCall," she said, smiling. They moved together easily, years of partnership translating into physical grace. Other couples swirled around them, but Lydia was only aware of Silas, his hand warm at her waist, his eyes full of love and pride. "Remember when I said I wanted to do this right?" he murmured. "Court you proper, take you to dances." "I remember." "Well, here we are. Little late, but better than never." He spun her gently. "What do you think? Worth the wait?" She laughed. "Everything with you is worth the wait." They danced 3 more dances before Rose demanded feeding, and they had to retreat to a quiet corner. But it was enough. This moment of normalcy, of celebration, of being just another ranching couple enjoying a spring evening in town. They'd earned this peace, paid for it in fear and blood and stubborn determination. Summer brought more prosperity. The cattle were healthy, the garden abundant, the hay crop excellent. They hired 2 more hands to help with the increased work, young men looking for honest employment and a chance to learn ranching from someone with integrity. Silas proved to be a patient teacher, and the new hands, brothers named Samuel and Thomas, learned quickly and worked hard. Lydia's advocacy work continued to grow. She was now corresponding with territorial representatives, helping to draft legislation that would protect small landowners from predatory speculation. Her voice carried weight because she'd lived through exactly what she was trying to prevent, and lawmakers listened when she wrote or testified. It was deeply satisfying work, using her intelligence and education for something that mattered. One afternoon in August, Sheriff Bridger rode out to the ranch, the same sheriff who'd been so unhelpful during the vein troubles. He looked uncomfortable, shifting in his saddle before finally dismounting. "McCall, Mrs. McCall," he greeted them stiffly. "Wanted to stop by and, well, to apologize for how I handled things last year. Should have taken your complaints more seriously. Should have investigated instead of dismissing you." Silas's expression was carefully neutral. "What prompted this change of heart?" Bridger looked ashamed. "The governor made it clear that my job depends on actually doing it. And after seeing how much evidence you folks gathered on your own, evidence I should have been collecting." He shook his head. "I was lazy and biased, and it nearly got people killed. I'm sorry. I'm trying to do better now." It was a genuine apology, and Lydia appreciated it even as she remained cautious. "Words are easy, Sheriff. Actions matter more." "I know. That's why I wanted you to hear it from me directly, and to tell you that if you ever need help again, I'll be there. No delays, no excuses." He tipped his hat. "I'll let you get back to your day." After he rode away, Silas looked at Lydia. "Think he means it?" "Time will tell," she said. "But I'm glad he's trying. Change has to start somewhere." Rose's first birthday came in September, and they celebrated with a small party, just the household and a few neighbors. The baby sat in her high chair, fascinated by the cake Mrs. Adler had made, more interested in smashing it than eating it. Everyone laughed as she decorated herself thoroughly in frosting and crumbs, and Silas captured the moment with a photograph, one of the first they'd had taken as a family. Looking at that photograph later, Lydia marveled at the journey that had brought them here. The frightened girl who'd stepped off the stagecoach 2 years ago barely existed anymore. In her place was a confident woman, a rancher's wife, a mother, an activist, someone who knew her worth and fought for what mattered. And Silas? He'd transformed too. The guarded, wounded veteran she'd married had opened up, let joy back into his life, learned to hope again. Together, they'd become something neither could have managed alone, a partnership built on honesty and respect and love that had weathered the worst storms and emerged stronger. "What are you thinking about?" Silas asked, finding her looking at the photograph one evening. "About how far we've come," she said softly. "About how grateful I am for every twist of fate that brought us together." He pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. "I used to think I got the wrong bride that day," he admitted. "Thought the universe was playing some kind of cosmic joke on me. But I was wrong. I got exactly the right bride. She just wasn't the one I ordered." Lydia turned in his arms, looking up at him. "And I thought I was taking someone else's place, living someone else's life. But this was always meant to be my life. Our life." "Do you ever wonder what happened to the real Catherine Hartley?" "Sometimes," Lydia admitted. "I hope she found whatever she was looking for. Hope she's happy somewhere." "I hope she knows what she gave up," Silas said. "And I hope wherever she is, she's grateful that you were brave enough to take the chance she couldn't." That winter was easier than the last. They knew what to expect now, had prepared better, faced it with the confidence of people who'd survived worse. Rose learned to walk, taking her first wobbling steps between her parents' outstretched hands on a snowy December afternoon. By spring, she was running everywhere, talking in simple sentences, demanding to help with everything. "She's definitely your daughter," Lydia said, watching Rose determinedly try to carry a bucket half her size. "She's definitely our daughter," Silas corrected, taking the bucket from Rose and replacing it with a smaller one she could actually manage. "Stubborn like me, smart like you, and absolutely certain she can do anything she sets her mind to. God help us when she's older," Lydia laughed. "God help the world," Silas agreed. "She's going to be unstoppable." And she was. As Rose grew, she proved to be everything they'd hoped, fierce and independent and loving, comfortable in her own skin in ways Lydia had never been as a child. She never noticed or cared about her mother's birthmark, never saw it as anything but part of who her mother was. To Rose, her mother was perfect, the source of comfort and wisdom and endless love. Years passed in the comfortable rhythm of ranch life. The cattle herd grew. The ranch hands became family. The relief fund helped dozens of families. Lydia's advocacy work led to real legislative changes. And through it all, Silas and Lydia remained partners, equal in every way that mattered, united in their goals and their love. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Silas took Lydia back to the spot where he'd first kissed her, that barn where he'd been mending her shawl by lantern light. It had been rebuilt after a storm 5 years ago, but it still felt like theirs, full of memories and significance. "Remember this?" he asked, pulling her into his arms. "Every detail," she whispered. "The smell of hay and leather, the way the lamplight made shadows dance, how nervous I was, how kind you were. How beautiful you were," he added. "Are, will always be." "Even with my mark?" She still asked sometimes, old insecurities dying hard. "Especially with your mark," he said firmly. "It's part of you, part of us, part of our story." He kissed her birthmark gently, as he had 1,000 times before. "You're perfect exactly as you are." She believed him. After 10 years, after everything they'd survived and built and become together, she finally truly believed it. Her birthmark wasn't a flaw or a curse. It was just part of her journey, part of the path that had led her here, to this man, this life, this hard-won happiness. "I love you," she said simply. "I love you too," he replied. "Always have, always will." They stood together in the barn where so much had changed between them, holding each other as sunset painted the world in gold. And Lydia understood with perfect clarity that she had everything she'd ever needed. Not the life she'd planned, not the life Catherine Hartley had rejected, but the life she'd fought for and earned and built from honesty and courage and love. She was home. Finally, completely, eternally home. And standing in her husband's arms with their daughter's laughter drifting from the house and the prairie stretching endlessly around them, Lydia Rowan McCall knew that sometimes the wrong choice leads to exactly the right place. Sometimes the detour becomes the destination. Sometimes the bride you didn't order turns out to be the woman you needed all along. The prairie wind whispered through the grass, carrying with it the scent of sage and possibility, and Lydia smiled, not despite her birthmark, but with it, carrying her mark with the dignity and strength of a woman who knew her worth. The setting sun caught the mountains and turned them to fire, and in that golden light, everything was exactly as it should be. Home, love, family, hard work and honest partnership, and the deep satisfaction of lives lived with integrity and purpose. This was the story of the wrong bride who became the right wife, the marked woman who found a scarred man, the desperate gamble that transformed into enduring love. And as the stars began to emerge overhead, those same stars Silas's mother had called promises of light in darkness, Lydia understood that some promises are kept in unexpected ways. She'd come west looking for escape and found everything instead. And that, she thought, was the greatest gift of all. The two HTTPs, youtube.com/watch VDT ZMZK.PU9U. Here's a cinematic American-style summary of I'm Not the Pretty One You Ordered, rewritten into 5 dramatic parts: opening, rising action, climax, resolution, breakthrough, and ending, with new character names to avoid repetition in your CB project. The pacing follows a filmic rhythm with emotional tension, sensory detail, and complete closure. Title: The Bride He Never Ordered, the Cowboy Who Chose Her Anyway. 1. Opening. The Wrong Bride Arrives. Wyoming Territory, 1877. The stagecoach rolled through the dust of Pine Hollow, carrying Lydia Rowan, a shy woman whose birthmark had made her an object of whispers all her life. In her pocket, one letter meant for another woman. Out of fear and desperation, she took her place as a mail-order bride. At the depot waited Silas McCall, a weathered rancher whose quiet strength filled the open air. When she stepped down, trembling, she blurted, "There's been a mistake. I'm not the pretty one you ordered." He studied her for a long moment before answering simply, "You're all I needed." Those 6 words, steady as a promise, became the beginning of a life neither of them had planned. 2. Rising action. The house that wouldn't welcome her. The marriage papers were signed without ceremony. No flowers, no preacher, just ink on wood and a silence that followed them home. The McCall Ranch was vast and lonely, a house that smelled of cedar and distance. The cook, Mrs. Adler, eyed Lydia with suspicion. The ranch hands whispered that she wasn't the kind Silas used to bring around. He left at dawn, returned at dusk. She ate alone. Yet little kindnesses began to appear. Warm coffee left at her door, a mended coat she hadn't asked for, a second pillow that smelled faintly of cedar. One night she found him quietly sewing the hem of her torn shawl. "This place isn't good at welcoming strangers," he said without looking up, "but don't let them make you feel like one." Something thawed inside her that no sun had managed to reach. 3. Climax. The man who stood between her and the past. Weeks passed in uneasy peace until a stranger rode up the drive. Marcus Vane, slick-voiced and cold-eyed, announced himself as Lydia's legal overseer, claiming she'd been promised as payment to another man back east. He held up papers, contracts, proof. "She belongs to me," he said. Silas didn't argue law. He folded his gloves and stepped between them. "You've got 2 minutes to leave this land," he said, his voice low as thunder, "or you won't ride again." The man sneered, but something in Silas's gaze sent him turning his horse and galloping into the wind. Lydia stood trembling, half expecting questions, blame. Instead, Silas said quietly, "Didn't need to ask if it was true." The past had come for her, and found someone already standing guard. 4. Resolution. Storms, scars, and second chances. Autumn winds gave way to a violent storm. When lightning struck near the corral, Silas fought to save a frightened colt and came away bleeding from a deep gash. Lydia dragged him inside, binding the wound with trembling hands. "You helped me when I was lost," she whispered. "Let me help you now." Through pain, he confessed the scar on his arm came from a fire, and a woman who'd left him for it. "After that, I stopped letting anyone look close," he said. Lydia met his eyes. "We don't choose our marks, only how we carry them." That night, as rain softened against the roof, he murmured, "You were never second best." For the first time, she believed it. 5. Breakthrough and ending. The love that grew by choice. Spring returned, bringing music and laughter Lydia had reintroduced to the town. She played guitar for the children beneath the old sycamore. Silas watched from afar, his heart fuller than he could say. When he finally spoke, it was before friends gathered under lantern light. "I didn't get the bride I asked for," he said. "I got something better." Pulling out his mother's ring, he knelt in the dust. "Lydia Rowan, will you marry me, proper this time?" Her tears caught the starlight. "Yes," she whispered. They wed in the field behind the house. No satin, no pews, only wildflowers and wind. Later, in the quiet bedroom, Silas wrapped his arms around her and asked, "You still think you're the wrong bride?" Lydia smiled through tears. "No, I think we finally got it right." Outside, the prairie glowed gold beneath the moon. Two souls who had started as strangers, now home in each other's keeping.